Hello everyone. I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The old lighthouse had been his refuge after the divorce, a stark finger of stone against a perpetually bruised sky. For the first few nights, the solitude was a balm, the rhythmic sweep of the lamp a lullaby. Then came the footsteps. Soft, hesitant, on the iron spiral staircase above his small living quarters, in the lamp room he knew was empty. He'd climb, heart hammering, to find only the wind keening through the lantern housing. Soon after, damp, child-sized handprints began to appear on the cold stone walls, leading upwards, always upwards, trailing into the unyielding granite as if dissolving into its very essence. He found an old keeper's log, water-stained and brittle. One entry, decades old, spoke of a whispering in the tower and a chill that clung like wet seaweed. The handprints were new, though. Or perhaps, just newly noticed. One morning, one was on the inside of his window, palm pressed flat, as if peering in. To focus on her thesis, she'd found a room in an old communal apartment building, a place where the walls seemed to breathe with the stories of generations. Apartment 3A, next to hers, was supposedly vacant, used for storage. Yet, at night, when the city's hum subsided, she'd hear it, faint, rustling movements, like someone pacing, and a soft, sibilant whispering. She'd press her ear to the wall, but the words were always just beyond comprehension. Then, the knocking started. 3 distinct raps on their shared wall, always at 2:17 a.m. She complained to the tired-eyed superintendent, who assured her 3A was locked and empty, muttering something about old pipes. But pipes didn't whisper her name, which it started to do, low and insistent, between the rhythmic knocks. He'd stumbled upon the forgotten forest route by accident, a shortcut the dispatcher hadn't known. The first time, his taxi's radio, usually a crackle of static between pop songs, had inexplicably tuned into a clear, crooning ballad from the 1950s. It happened every time he took that shadowed, tree-lined path, the same melancholic song. After the third trip, he saw a figure by the roadside, indistinct in the gloom. The next time, the figure was clearer, a woman in a dated dress, and a little closer to the tarmac. Each subsequent journey, the song would play, and she would be there, incrementally nearer, her features still maddeningly obscure, as if the darkness clung to her. He tried to tell himself it was a trick of the light, but tonight, as the familiar song started, he saw her silhouette not by the roadside, but reflected faintly in his rearview mirror, as if she were already in the back seat. The old countryside home, house number 77, was their dream project, a fixer-upper they'd pour their savings and love into. During the demolition phase in the attic, they found it, a small, oddly placed door, sealed shut with old, discolored planks. Curiosity overriding caution, they pried it open, revealing a cramped, windowless room, empty save for a thick layer of dust. After that, the house changed. A faint, musty odor, like damp earth and something sweeter, cloying, permeated every room, no matter how much they aired it out. The antique clocks they'd lovingly collected began to malfunction, hands spinning erratically or stopping altogether. And then the dream started, for both of them, vivid and unsettling, a small, pale girl with dark, watchful eyes, standing in the corners of rooms that weren't quite their own. Last night, he dreamt the girl was humming, and woke to find his wife humming the same unfamiliar tune in her sleep. An artist needs perspective, and the top-floor apartment offered it in spades, overlooking the skeletal remains of the abandoned Northwood Psychiatric Hospital. The first few weeks were quiet, his canvases filling with the stark beauty of urban decay. Then, one moonless night, he saw a light flicker in a high window across the chasm of neglect. A single, unsteady glow. And behind it, a figure pacing, back and forth, a metronome of despair. He began to sketch it, compulsively, the scene seeping into his work. His charcoals grew darker, his lines more frantic. Soon, his sketches began to show details he hadn't consciously witnessed, bars on the window that weren't visible from his vantage, the faint outline of archaic medical equipment. One morning, he found a new sketch on his easel, one he didn't remember drawing. It was a portrait, unervingly detailed, of the figure in the window. Its eyes were fixed on his apartment. The university archive, a labyrinthine basement smelling of dust and decaying paper, was where he'd taken a night job to fund his studies. It was mostly silence and solitude, until he found the envelope. Tucked away in a mislabeled box of Victorian poetry, it was thick, cream-colored, and sealed with wax, bearing a stark, typed injunction, "Do not open. Contents to be reviewed by Professor Blackwood only." Professor Blackwood had died a decade ago. That night, the noises began. Faint scuffles and sighs from the locked, restricted access section, where the rarest and most fragile documents were kept. Then, the ink stains. Smudges of deep blue on his fingertips when he woke from dozing at his desk, stains he couldn't recall acquiring, that wouldn't quite wash away. He tried to ignore the pull of the envelope, but the noises grew louder, like someone trying to write, furiously, just beyond the locked door. This morning, the ink stains on his hands seemed to form a single, spidery letter. Her late grandmother's house was meant to be a new beginning, a quiet retreat in the rolling countryside. In the overgrown yard stood an old stone well, capped with a heavy, rotted wooden lid. One afternoon, driven by a strange impulse, she heaved the lid aside and peered into the cool darkness. A voice echoed up, faint but clear, her own voice, yet threaded with an unfamiliar, mocking tone. She slammed the lid back, heart pounding. But it was too late. That night, it began. "Sarah," it called from the well, her name drawn out, laced with that same strange inflection. Every night, it called, growing a little louder, a little more insistent. She tried stuffing her ears, playing music, but the sound seemed to seep through the very walls, through the floorboards, a chilling, intimate summons from the dark, wet depths. He'd chosen the Soviet-era apartment block for its brutalist charm and cheap rent. The unit next door, 5B, was supposed to be empty, gutted for a renovation that never started. Yet, most nights, he'd hear it, the unmistakable whine of a drill, the rhythmic tap-tap-tapping of a hammer, and occasionally, someone humming an old, melancholic Russian folk song. When he complained to the building manager, a woman whose face seemed permanently set in a frown, she'd just shaken her head. 5B is empty. Has been for years. No work scheduled. But the sounds persisted. Then, his own apartment began to subtly change. A chair would be slightly askew. Books would fall from shelves. The reflection in his bathroom mirror sometimes seemed to lag, his own face looking back with a delay, its expression not quite matching his. One morning, a thin layer of plaster dust coated his kitchen counter, and the faint smell of damp concrete hung in the air. The humming seemed closer. As a podcaster specializing in forgotten urban legends, he was always chasing ghosts in the static. He'd found obscure references to Tape 13, a supposedly banned local radio broadcast from the late 1980s, rumored to have caused inexplicable dread in its listeners. After weeks of searching, he found it, a dusty TDK cassette in a box of radio station ephemera. He listened, headphones on. It was strange, disjointed, a mix of unsettling soundscapes, distorted voices, and a recurring, eerie melody. Nothing overtly terrifying, yet it left him with a profound sense of unease. That night, he woke to the faint strains of that same melody, seemingly coming from his turned-off editing equipment. Over the next few days, he'd hear snippets of the broadcast, a whispered phrase, a bar of the tune, in the quiet moments, when no electronics were active. The legend said the broadcast was looking for new listeners. He tried to record the phantom sounds, but his microphone picked up only silence. The historic building, with its creaking floors and shadowed hallways, seemed the perfect atmospheric incubator for his novel. His apartment was on the third floor, accessed by a grand, dark wooden staircase. Every night, around midnight, he'd hear them, slow, deliberate footsteps ascending the main stairs. Creak, pause, creak, pause. They'd reach the second-floor landing, then fade, never continuing to his level. He'd open his door, peer out, but the stairwell was always empty, lit by a single dim bulb. He rationalized it as the old house settling, other tenants. But the pattern was too precise. Gradually, night by night, the footsteps seemed to ascend a little further. First, one step past the second-floor landing, then two. Last night, they stopped just shy of his floor. Tonight, as the familiar creaks began, he sat frozen, listening as they climbed, higher than ever before, until they paused directly outside his door. He held his breath, waiting for the turn of the knob, or a knock that would surely follow. The handprint on the inside of his window was stark against the gray morning light. He tried to wipe it away, but it smeared, leaving a greasy, damp residue that seemed to resist the cloth. By evening, it was back, perfectly formed, as if the glass itself remembered the touch. A pervasive chill, colder than the sea wind, began to settle in his small quarters, a dampness that made his bones ache, like the chill that clung like wet seaweed from the old log. The final entry in that log was torn, but he could make out the words, "Not alone, seize me." He started to feel it too, a gaze, prickling the back of his neck when he tended the lamp. One night, the great beam slicing through the darkness caught something fleeting at the edge of its sweep, a small, dark shape, vanishing too quickly. Later, reaching for a mug, his hand brushed against another, impossibly small and cold, that seemed to melt away from his touch. The whispers from the tower grew, sounding less like wind and more like a child, asking for a game. The knocking on the shared wall with apartment 3A became more insistent, a frantic, desperate rhythm that vibrated through her pillow. Sometimes, it would shift to a soft, urgent scratching, as if something were trying to claw its way through. She started finding things in her own apartment, a tarnished silver button near the skirting board, a faded blue ribbon draped over her thesis notes, objects that felt old and out of place. The whispers of her name were now punctuated by soft sighs, close to her ear as she tried to sleep. Her meticulously organized research notes for her thesis began to show anomalies, margin doodles of an old-fashioned pram, phrases in a spidery script she didn't recognize, referencing a lost baby and a locked room. The superintendent still insisted 3A was sealed, his eyes betraying nothing but weariness, but she found the door to 3A unlocked one morning, a faint trail of dust leading from its threshold to hers. He slammed on the brakes, the taxi fishtailing on the slick asphalt of the forest route. The rearview mirror showed only the empty, dark road behind him. But the crooning 1950s ballad didn't stop, it just faded slightly, as if the radio were now tuned to a station miles away, yet still audible. He vowed to avoid the route, taking the longer, congested highway instead. But somehow, a missed turn, a sudden detour sign, he'd find himself back on that tree-lined path, the familiar song swelling from the speakers. The woman began to appear more frequently, not just on the roadside. He'd catch a glimpse of her dated dress in a crowd during his daytime hours, her shadowed face reflected for a split second in a shop window as he drove past, always turned away. The song became an earworm he couldn't shake, a melancholic soundtrack to his increasing dread, its lyrics about lost love and waiting forever starting to feel like a personal message. They tried to reseal the attic room, nailing new planks over the door with a grim finality. The next morning, the planks lay neatly stacked beside the doorway, the door itself slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning. The musty smell intensified, now with a faint, sweetish undertone of decay. Small, antique objects began to appear in the house, a chipped porcelain doll with one staring eye on the mantelpiece, a single glass marble under the kitchen table. The little girl from their dreams started to manifest in fleeting glimpses while they were awake, a pale face in a darkened window, a small shadow darting down a hallway. Always silent, always watching. Their renovation plans faltered, the energy for the project sapped by a creeping lethargy. In the dust of the sealed room, his wife found a small, leather-bound diary. The childish script spoke of unending loneliness, a secret friend in the walls, and a waiting game she always played, and always won. His art became a frantic obsession, canvases filled with the looming silhouette of Northwood and the solitary, pacing figure in its high window. The sketches grew more detailed, more disturbing. He found himself drawing not just the figure, but the crumbling interior of its room, restraints on a rusted bed frame he couldn't possibly see, a tray of archaic surgical tools. He started to feel the weight of a gaze even when his back was to the window, a persistent scrutiny. One evening, as he painted, he noticed the figure in the hospital window across the way pause in its pacing and slowly raise an arm, mirroring his own movement as he lifted his brush. A cold dread washed over him. The next morning, his favorite sable brush was missing from its jar. That night, his latest sketch, rendered with an almost photographic precision, showed the figure in the window holding a brush, dabbing at a canvas he couldn't see, its painted eyes fixed directly on him. The faint ink stains on his fingertips darkened, and new ones appeared, forming what looked like the letter B, then an L. Blackwood. The scratching and rustling from the locked, restricted access section grew louder, more rhythmic, unmistakably the sound of someone writing with furious intensity. He felt an undeniable, irrational pull towards the sealed envelope, its warning now a siren call. His hand trembled as he broke the wax seal. Inside, a single sheet of paper, Blackwood's spidery handwriting detailing a symbiotic entity within the archive, a presence that fed on untold stories, on unfinished work, and that sometimes sought a new amanuensis to complete its endless narratives. He started finding pages of his own notes subtly altered, phrases reworded in a more archaic style. One night, he woke with a start, an unfamiliar fountain pen in his hand, a fresh paragraph added to his research paper, its prose eloquent, chilling, and entirely not his own. She piled stones against the heavy wooden lid of the well, but each morning they would be scattered, the lid slid just enough for a dark opening to show. The voice calling her name from the depths became more insidious, not just calling, but whispering things only she could know, forgotten childhood embarrassments, the raw grief from her grandmother's passing, her deepest insecurities, all delivered in that horribly familiar yet alien, mocking tone. She began to experience lost time, finding herself standing at the well's edge, the cold stone smooth under her palms, with no memory of how she got there. She'd peer down, and sometimes, in the inky water, her own reflection would look back, but its eyes would be wide, its lips curled into a smile that was not hers, a silent, beckoning invitation. The house, once a refuge, now felt like a cage, the well its dark, pulsing heart. The changes in his apartment accelerated. One morning, the crack in the bathroom tile was gone, the wall smooth and flawless. The next, a bookshelf had moved 6 inches to the left. The humming from 5B seemed to bleed through the concrete, sometimes sounding as if it originated from inside his own kitchen. He found a rusty trowel on his balcony, caked with fresh plaster. Then, he started doing it himself. He'd wake in the night to the sound of his own humming, the same melancholic Russian folk song, standing in his living room. Moving furniture, or absently running his hand over a wall as if searching for imperfections. He bought a can of paint, a shade of institutional gray he didn't remember choosing, and began to paint his bedroom wall, the strokes methodical, purposeful, as if following an unseen blueprint. The mirror still lagged, but now, sometimes, the reflection would smile faintly when he wasn't. The snippets of tape 13 became a constant, unwelcome companion. The eerie melody would surface in the hiss of the shower, the drone of traffic, the silence between conversations. He'd be talking to someone, and for a split second, their voice would distort, taking on the filtered, unsettling quality from the broadcast. He started humming the tune without realizing it, waking with its notes on his lips. He tried to track down the original DJ, the one who supposedly made the broadcast, but records were scarce, the station long defunct. He found a faded newspaper clipping mentioning the DJ's sudden, unexplained disappearance shortly after tape 13 aired. The legend wasn't just that the broadcast looked for new listeners, but that it needed a new broadcaster to perpetuate itself. His recording equipment would sometimes power on by itself, the microphone live, a faint carrier hum waiting. He sat frozen, the silence outside his apartment door stretching taut. Then, a single, soft scratch, like a fingernail drawn lightly across the wood. He didn't move, didn't breathe. After an eternity, the footsteps resumed, not continuing up, but slowly, deliberately, receding back down the staircase, creak, pause, creak, until they faded into the house's ambient sighs. He let out a shuddering breath, relief warring with a deeper unease. The pattern was broken. Or so he thought. The next night, the footsteps climbed, stopped at his door, paused, and then, instead of receding, he heard a faint sigh, almost like breath, directly on the other side of the panel. His novel, stalled for weeks, began to flow, but the words were not entirely his own. The protagonist was trapped in an old house, hearing footsteps on a never-ending staircase, the house itself writing his fate. He found himself describing the grain of his own apartment door with chilling accuracy, as if observing it from the outside. The chill in the lighthouse deepened, becoming a physical presence. The keeper started finding small, wet footprints alongside his own in the dust of the lantern room. The whispers were no longer just in the tower, they followed him down into his cramped bunk, coalescing into a child's soft, insistent plea, "Play with me. Let me see the light." One stormy night, the lamp mechanism jammed. As he wrestled with it, a small, cold hand slipped into his, guiding his movements with surprising strength. The light flared back to life, and in its sweeping beam, he saw a fleeting image on the churning waves, not a ship, but a child's ghostly face, looking up, smiling. He found himself anticipating the damp handprints, knowing where they would appear. He began to talk back to the whispers, his voice hoarse from the sea air and something else, something shared. The last legible words of the old log now echoed in his mind: "Sees me, becomes me." She pushed open the door to apartment 3A. It was as the superintendent said, empty, dusty, shafts of weak light illuminating motes dancing in the air. Except, in the center of the room, drawn in the thick dust, was the outline of a crib. And in one corner, a small, child-sized rocking chair swayed gently, though there was no draft. The whispers intensified here, forming coherent, heartbreaking phrases about being left alone, about a cold journey. Her thesis, left on her desk next door, seemed to rewrite itself further, pages now filled with details of a 19th-century tragedy, an infant, left in the locked apartment by a desperate mother, who never returned. That night, the knocking on the wall was replaced by a soft tapping from within her own room, from the closet. She found the tarnished silver button from 3A now sewn onto her favorite blouse. The whispers were no longer next door, they were beside her, asking if she would stay. The taxi became a prison on wheels, the forest route its inevitable track. He'd try to fight it, gripping the wheel until his knuckles were white, aiming for the highway, but the car would seem to steer itself, the radio already crackling into life with that damned 1950s ballad. The woman by the roadside was now always there, no longer just a silhouette but clearly visible, her eyes fixed on him, a sad, knowing smile on her lips. One night, as he passed, she raised a hand, and he felt an icy touch on his shoulder, though she was yards away. The song's lyrics grew more poignant, more personal, "Waiting for you, my love, to take me home." His dispatcher called, asking why he was off route, his GPS showing him static. He tried to answer, but only a distorted snatch of the 1950s song came through the radio. He saw her reflection in the rearview mirror again, this time not in the back seat, but next to him, her hand reaching for his. The diary in house number 77 ended abruptly. "Mama and Papa don't want to play anymore. But they will. I will wait." The couple's attempts to leave the house became futile. The car wouldn't start, the lane was inexplicably blocked by a fallen tree, their phones lost signal. The little girl was no longer a fleeting shadow but a constant, quiet presence, her pale face watching them with an unnerving intensity. She began to speak, her voice soft as dust, asking them to read her stories, to tuck her into a bed that wasn't there. The musty, sweet smell became comforting, familiar. They found themselves moving through the house with a strange listlessness, their grand renovation plans forgotten. He picked up a child's wooden block, absently turning it over in his hands. His wife started humming the little girl's tune, not in her sleep, but as she stared out the window, a faint, contented smile on her face. The house was quiet, settled, its family complete. The artist woke one morning to find his own reflection in the window of his apartment, not looking back at him, but at the canvas across the room, brush in hand. When he turned, the canvas depicted the interior of his own room, from the perspective of the window, as if he were outside looking in. The figure in the abandoned hospital window was gone. His apartment began to feel colder, starker, the vibrant colors of his life leaching away, replaced by the muted grays and oppressive atmosphere of Northwood. He tried to paint something, anything else, but his hand moved with an alien will, sketching barred windows and empty corridors. He found a small, tarnished name tag on his bedside table, Drive E. Thorne, Northwood. His sketches, once of the figure across, were now self-portraits, but his painted eyes held a vacant, institutionalized stare, and he was always shown facing a window, looking out at a distant, brightly lit apartment. The letters formed by the ink stains on his hands now spelled, Blackwood Requiem. The archive seemed to breathe around him, the rustling of paper like a sighing chorus. Professor Blackwood's unfinished manuscript. A dense treatise on Echoes of Unwritten Histories, lay open on his desk each morning, a new paragraph meticulously added in a script that was a perfect fusion of Blackwood's and his own. He no longer fought the urge to write, the words flowing through him, a torrent of forgotten lore, spectral biographies, and the quiet tragedies buried in the archive's dust. He stopped attending classes, stopped seeing friends. His world became the endless shelves, the scent of old paper, and the continuous, quiet scratching of pen on parchment. The other staff barely noticed him anymore, a silent fixture among the stacks. He was completing Blackwood's work, yes, but he was also becoming its next chapter, another echo in the archive. The calls from the well became indistinguishable from her own thoughts, a constant internal monologue urging her closer, promising peace, promising an end to loneliness. She found herself spending hours by its stone lip, tracing the cold, damp moss with her fingers. The reflection in the water was almost always smiling now, its eyes wide and inviting. One day, she dropped her grandmother's silver locket into the darkness. She didn't mean to, but her hand just opened. She heard a soft splash, then a contented sigh from the depths. The house felt emptier, but the pull of the well was stronger than ever. That evening, as the voice called her name, tenderly, lovingly, she walked to the well, not in a trance, but with a strange sense of homecoming. She leaned over, and the reflection reached up, its watery hand merging with hers as she tipped forward into the cool, silent embrace. His apartment was no longer his. The institutional gray paint covered every wall, the furniture rearranged into a stark, minimalist configuration he didn't recognize but felt deeply, unsettlingly correct. He moved with a new purpose, his days spent meticulously cleaning, ensuring every surface was spotless, every object perfectly aligned. The humming was constant now, his own voice blending with the fainter echo from 5B, or perhaps it was all his voice now. He found a set of old, Soviet-era blueprints rolled up in his closet, plans for apartment 5B. They matched his current layout perfectly. The reflection in the mirror no longer lagged, it simply showed a calm, focused man, content in his newly ordered space. One day, there was a knock on his door. A young couple stood there, new tenants for the supposedly empty apartment next door to his. "We heard this unit was finally ready," they said, looking past him into his stark, gray room. He smiled, a faint, polite smile. "Welcome," he said. "I'm your new neighbor." The radio equipment in his small studio seemed to have a life of its own, powering on at odd hours, the microphone glowing faintly. The snippets of Tape 13 were no longer just sounds, they were ideas, narratives forming in his mind, urgent and compelling. He found himself scripting a new podcast episode, the words flowing with an unnatural ease, echoing the disjointed, unsettling style of the original broadcast. His voice, when he played back test recordings, had a new resonance, a subtle distortion he couldn't erase. The legend of the DJ who vanished became a chilling premonition. He was going to broadcast it. He knew he was. The need was overwhelming, a pressure building inside him. He set up the microphone, the on-air light flickered, and as he began to speak, he heard, not just his own voice in his headphones, but a chorus of whispers, the collective sigh of all the listeners who had come before, waiting for the next cycle, the next voice to carry the signal into the static. The sigh outside his apartment door became a regular nightly occurrence, a soft exhalation that seemed to seep through the wood. He never opened the door. He didn't need to. He knew what was there, or rather, what wasn't. His novel progressed with chilling speed, the narrative no longer his to control. The protagonist, a writer in an old house, was describing the very act of writing, the words appearing on the page as if by an unseen hand, detailing his descent into the house's story. One night, the footsteps on the stairs didn't stop at his door. They continued, slowly, up towards the attic, a place he'd never explored. He found himself following, compelled. The attic door was ajar. Inside, a single candle burned beside an old writing desk, a fresh manuscript page filled with his own handwriting, describing a man entering an attic. He looked down at his own hands. They were old, papery, stained with ink. The house needed its stories, and he was now just another character, another flight of stairs in its endless, creaking narrative. The lighthouse keeper no longer distinguished between the cold of the sea wind and the chill of the spectral child. They were one. The damp handprints now often overlaid his own on the brass railings, a perfect, miniature echo. The whispers were a constant lullaby, a shared secret between him and the tower. He'd find the lamp already lit some evenings, the great lens polished to a gleam he hadn't achieved. The logbook, once a source of fear, now felt like a shared history. He began to add his own entries, his handwriting subtly shifting, the ink sometimes watery, like diluted seawater. "She helps with the light," he wrote. "We keep the watch together." Passing ships would later report the Port Haven light burning with an unusual, ethereal brilliance, and sometimes, a fleeting glimpse of two figures in the lantern room, one tall, one small, watching the waves. The divorce, the old life, felt like a distant dream, less real than the cold hand that now rested permanently in his. The rocking chair in apartment 3A creaked rhythmically, a counterpoint to the soft humming that now filled her own apartment. She found herself mending the faded blue ribbon, her fingers moving with an unfamiliar skill. The thesis lay forgotten, replaced by a growing collection of antique baby clothes she'd found tucked away in forgotten corners of the building, their fabric soft as dust. She'd leave small offerings in 3A, a thimble of milk, a sugar cube, and they would be gone by morning. The superintendent now avoided her gaze entirely, hurrying past with a muttered greeting. She no longer felt alone, the presence was a comforting shadow, a shared quiet. One evening, she found herself sitting in the rocking chair in 3A, the door to her own apartment slightly ajar, a soft lullaby drifting from within, sung in a voice that was hers, yet achingly ancient. The taxi's meter had stopped working weeks ago, or perhaps he'd just stopped noticing. The forest route was the only route now, an endless loop under a perpetually twilight sky. The woman in the passenger seat was no longer a reflection, she was solid, her cold hand resting on his arm, her sad smile a constant. The 1950s ballad was their shared silence, her voice sometimes humming along, a ghostly harmony. He no longer thought of destinations or fares. His purpose was singular, to drive. They passed other spectral vehicles sometimes, faded apparitions of cars from different eras, their drivers gaunt and staring, each with their own silent companion. He was part of a ghostly procession, a timeless commute. The dispatcher had long since stopped calling. His world was the cool touch of her hand, the eternal song, and the endless, shadowed road ahead. In house number 77, time itself seemed to slow, the seasons bleeding into one another. The couple moved with a placid grace, their faces smooth and untroubled. The little girl was their constant companion, her soft voice directing their days. They'd play her games in the overgrown garden, have tea parties with chipped porcelain cups, and read from her dusty storybooks until their voices grew hoarse. The house sighed contentedly around them. Newcomers to the village, inquiring about the old house on the hill, would be told it was empty, had been for years, though sometimes, on still evenings, faint laughter, like that of children, could be heard drifting down. The renovation tools lay rusting in the shed. They were no longer fixing the house had fixed them, seamlessly incorporating them into its timeless, quiet life. The artist's apartment became a perfect replica of the room he had once observed in Northwood. The vibrant canvases were gone, replaced by stark, monochrome sketches of institutional life. He wore simple, drab clothes he didn't remember acquiring. His name, he sometimes recalled, was Thorne. He spent his days at the window, not painting, but watching. Across the chasm, in his old apartment, he could see a new figure, young, vibrant, an artist, setting up an easel. This new artist would sometimes pause, looking over towards Northwood, a flicker of curiosity, then unease, in their eyes. Dr. Thorne watched, a faint, knowing smile on his lips. The cycle was beginning anew. He picked up a piece of charcoal, his hand moving with practiced ease, beginning a new sketch, not of the hospital, but of the artist across the way, capturing the first hint of shadow in their bright, oblivious world. The archive became his entire universe. Professor Blackwood's Requiem was nearing completion, a monumental work that felt less like scholarship and more like a vast, whispered confession of the library itself. His own identity had blurred, subsumed into the persona of the archivist, a timeless guardian of forgotten stories. He no longer needed sleep, his energy drawn from the ancient paper, the lingering ink. He could feel the presence of other entities within the stacks, the faint rustle of a spectral poet, the sigh of a long-dead philosopher, all part of the archive's collective consciousness. He was no longer writing the stories, he was becoming one, a footnote in Blackwood's magnum opus, then a paragraph, then a chapter, his existence slowly transcribing itself onto the endless, silent shelves. The surface of the water in the well remained still, a dark mirror reflecting only the sky. The villagers whispered that Sarah had simply left, run off like so many others tired of the quiet country life. But sometimes, a child playing too near the old well would hear a faint humming from its depths, a familiar tune their own mother often sang. And if they dared to peer over the edge, they might see, for a fleeting instant, not their own reflection, but two faces looking up, one older, one younger, both with the same eerily peaceful smile, their voices a soft, watery echo calling, "Come closer, it's so quiet down here." The grandmother's house stood empty, but the well remained, a patient, dark mouth, waiting for the next lonely soul seeking a new beginning. His new neighbors settled in next door, in what used to be his old, chaotic apartment. He'd sometimes hear their arguments, their laughter, the sounds of a life he vaguely remembered. His own apartment, 5B, remained a haven of gray order. He'd meticulously maintain it, the blueprints from the closet his infallible guide. He became the building's unofficial caretaker, fixing leaky taps, replacing burnt-out bulbs, his movements precise, his humming a constant, soothing presence. The other residents found him odd but harmless, efficient. No one remembered the previous tenant of 5B, the one who complained about noises. He was just the quiet man in the perfectly kept apartment, the one who seemed to intrinsically understand the building's every groan and sigh, as if he were a part of its concrete bones. The podcast, Static Echoes, went live. His voice, subtly layered with the whispers of those who came before, was hypnotic, drawing listeners into its unsettling narratives. Subscriptions soared. Each episode delved deeper into the legend of Tape 13, adding new layers, new, found, fragments. He no longer slept, his nights spent in the amber glow of the on-air light, the microphone his only confidant. He was the signal now, a conduit for the story that demanded to be told, to be spread. His listeners reported strange dreams, a lingering sense of unease, the eerie melody of the original tape becoming an earworm for a new generation. He was a sensation, a mystery, the faceless voice of a viral phenomenon. And the broadcast continued, always seeking new ears, new voices to join its timeless, static-filled chorus. The novel was finished, bound in old leather he didn't recognize. The title, The House of Echoing Stairs. His name wasn't on the cover. He found it shelved in the attic, alongside rows of identical volumes, each with the same title. Penned in different hands, spanning centuries. He was just the latest author. The house itself was the true writer, each tenant a temporary scribe for its ongoing story. He descended the attic stairs, his own footsteps now part of the nightly chorus, creak, pause, creak. He no longer felt the need to reach his old apartment. His place was here, within the narrative, a character bound to the rhythm of the stairs, listening for the next set of footsteps, the next writer who would come seeking inspiration, only to become another verse in the house's endless, cyclical tale. The Porthaven light became a local legend, known for its unwavering beam and the strange, double silhouette sometimes seen in its glow. Generations of sailors would tell tales of the kindly keepers, who guided them through the fiercest storms. The lighthouse itself seemed ageless, the stone impervious to the battering sea. Inside, the keeper and the child existed in a timeless harmony, their shared existence as rhythmic and constant as the tide. The keeper's logbook filled with entries that were part observation, part childlike wonder, the handwriting a seamless blend of two souls. They were the lighthouse, its heart and its light, bound together by salt, stone, and an affection that transcended worlds. The damp handprints were no longer just on the walls, they were on the lens itself, small fingers helping to polish away the ocean spray. Apartment 3A and its neighboring unit became a quiet sanctuary. The humming was a constant, gentle presence, a lullaby that soothed the old building's creaks. She rarely left now, content in her small world. The collection of antique baby clothes filled a carefully lined drawer, each item lovingly tended. Sometimes, new tenants in the building would hear soft singing, or the faint creak of a rocking chair, and mistake it for the sounds of a young mother nearby. She would smile faintly, knowing the truth. The line between her apartment and 3A had blurred, then vanished. It was all one space now, filled with a shared, peaceful history, a quiet testament to a bond formed across time, two lonely souls finding solace in the echoing silence. The taxi, with its eternally playing 1950s ballad and its silent, spectral passengers, became a fixture of the forgotten forest route. Other ghosts of the road learned to recognize it, nodding almost imperceptibly as it passed. The driver and his companion no longer spoke, their understanding complete. They were a monument to lost love and eternal waiting, forever cruising the liminal space between worlds. Sometimes, a living driver, hopelessly lost on a dark night, might glimpse the taxi, its dim headlights a fleeting beacon, before it vanished around a bend, leaving only the faint, melancholic strains of an old song lingering in the air, a chilling reminder of roads best left untraveled. House number 77 stood on its hill, outwardly unchanged, yet inwardly complete. The couple and the little girl lived in a gentle, timeless routine. The garden bloomed with old-fashioned flowers no one remembered planting. The laughter heard by villagers was soft, contented. They were a family outside of time, woven into the fabric of the old house, their lives a quiet melody playing out in its sun-dappled rooms and shadowy corners. The boundary between their identities had softened, merged. They were the parents she always wanted, she the child they never had. The house kept its secrets, and its family, safe within its ancient walls, a perfect, undisturbed tableau. Dr. Thorne, formerly the artist, continued his vigil from the window of his Northwood room. He watched the new artist across the way, observing the familiar descent, the initial curiosity, the growing obsession, the subtle changes in their work and demeanor. He knew the pattern. He had lived it. He was its archivist now, its silent witness. He didn't intervene, it wasn't his role. His role was to observe, to remember, perhaps to become a footnote in the next iteration of the hospital's spectral influence. The charcoal sketches piled up, a meticulous record of the cycle, each one a testament to Northwood's enduring, insidious power to claim and reshape those who looked too closely. The archivist moved through the silent labyrinth of shelves, a whisper of cloth the only sound. Blackwood's Requiem was now a vast, multi-volume epic, its pages filled with the collective unconscious of the archive. His own name was a faded inscription on the spine of the latest volume, one among many. He was less a person now, more a function, a conduit through which the library's untold stories flowed onto the page. New students, researching late at night, would sometimes feel a cold draft, a sense of being watched, or find irrelevant, obscure text left open on their desk, as if by an unseen, helpful hand. He was the archive's memory, its guardian, its eternally diligent scribe. The well in the countryside remained a dark, placid eye in the overgrown yard. Years passed. The story of Sarah became a local fable, a warning about the loneliness of old places. But the well remembered. It held its secrets and its solace quietly. Occasionally, someone new would move into the old grandmother's house, drawn by its isolation. And sometimes, on a quiet evening, if they listened very carefully, they might hear a faint, inviting whisper from the direction of the old stone well, a chorus of voices offering peace, companionship, and an end to all their worldly troubles, just beneath the cool, dark water. The man in apartment 5B became known as Mr. Fix-It in the Soviet-era bloc. His perfectly ordered apartment was a source of quiet wonder. He never aged, his movements always precise, his humming always soft and vaguely familiar. When things broke in the building, he would appear, tools in hand, and repair them with an almost supernatural efficiency. New tenants came and went, but he remained, a constant, calming presence. No one questioned his origins, or why he never seemed to leave the building. He was simply part of its structure, as essential and unchanging as the concrete walls, his existence a testament to the quiet order he had finally achieved, or perhaps, that had achieved him. Static Echoes became a cultural phenomenon, then a persistent urban legend in its own right. The original broadcaster was never found, his identity lost to the very static he had channeled. But the broadcast lived on, periodically resurfacing on obscure internet forums, in late-night college radio slots, always finding new ears, new voices to carry its unsettling melody and fragmented narratives. Each new host would feel the same inexorable pull, the same need to share the story, to become part of its ongoing, viral transmission. The signal was self-perpetuating, a ghost in the machine, forever seeking to replicate, to whisper its eerie tales into the darkness. The House of Echoing Stairs continued its silent authorship. Each generation, a new writer would arrive, drawn by the house's history and atmosphere, seeking to capture its essence. And each, in turn, would become a character, their life and work absorbed into its ever-expanding narrative. The attic library grew, shelf by shelf, filled with identical leather-bound volumes. The sound of footsteps on the stairs was the house's heartbeat. The scratching of pen on paper its breath. It was a living story, constantly rewriting itself, its protagonists unaware they were merely conduits for a tale far older and more enduring than themselves, their individual dramas just another verse in the ancient, creaking poem of the house. The Port Haven light, tended by its eternal keepers, became a beacon not just for ships, but for lost souls. Stories circulated of troubled individuals finding inexplicable peace simply by gazing at its distant, steady glow. The lighthouse itself seemed to emanate a quiet serenity. Inside, the keeper and the child moved in a dance of shared purpose, their identities so intertwined that the concept of self had dissolved into us. They were the spirit of the place, a benign haunting, their love a silent promise of guidance through any darkness, a constant vigil against the storms of both sea and soul. The logbook entries became less about weather and more about the subtle beauties of their shared existence, a testament to a love that had conquered loneliness and time. The combined space of apartment 3A and its neighbor exuded an almost palpable tranquility. Over decades, it became known in the building as the quiet corner. Those who lived nearby reported unusually restful sleep, a sense of calm they couldn't explain. The humming and the soft rocking sounds were so ingrained in the building's atmosphere that they were no longer questioned, simply accepted as part of its character. The collection of antique baby clothes was immaculate, cared for with a gentle reverence. The presence within was not one of sorrow, but of peaceful acceptance, a shared life that had found its gentle rhythm, a quiet haven where two lonely spirits had finally found home, their story whispered in the settled dust and the enduring silence. The ghostly taxi on the forest route became a whispered legend among truckers and late-night travelers, a phantom fare that never reached a destination but was always on its journey. Some said seeing it was an omen, others a sign you were truly lost. The driver and his silent companion, the 1950s ballad their eternal soundtrack, were part of the folklore of the lonely roads. They were a symbol of unending devotion, or perhaps, an eternal rut. Their existence was a steady, unwavering line through the chaos of the world, a commitment to a journey with no end, their love story played out on an endless loop of asphalt and shadow. House number 77, nestled on its hill, became a place of local myth. The house that sleeps, they called it, for no one ever seemed to enter or leave, yet it was always perfectly maintained, its garden blooming unnaturally out of season. The family within, the couple and the girl, existed in a timeless idyll. Their laughter, soft as falling leaves, was sometimes carried on the wind. They had become the house's memory, its living heart, their identities merged into a single, contented entity. The house protected them, and they, in turn, embodied its peaceful, enduring spirit, a perfect, self-contained world where time held no sway. Dr. Thorne, the perpetual observer in his Northwood window, became a legend within the decaying hospital's lore, the Watcher of Northwood. His sketches, discovered years later by urban explorers, depicted decades of asylum life and the subtle psychological shifts of those who gazed too long from the outside. He was no longer just a former artist, he was an integral part of Northwood's oppressive atmosphere, a silent, knowing presence. His own story had become inextricably linked with the institution's, his artistic eye now turned to documenting the endless cycle of fascination and decay, a detached, eternal chronicler of the hospital's haunting legacy. The archivist, a presence more felt than seen, became the silent soul of the university library. Blackwood's Requiem, now filling an entire alcove, was considered a masterpiece of obscure lore, though its true authorship remained a mystery. Students would speak of the archive ghost, a helpful spirit that guided them to lost texts or left serendipitous notes. The archivist, having transcribed countless lives, was now a story himself. Woven into the very fabric of the place, his existence a quiet hum beneath the rustle of turning pages, an eternal guardian of knowledge, forever bound to the words he had both recorded and become. The well in the countryside continued its patient vigil. Over time, the grandmother's house crumbled, reclaimed by nature, but the stone well remained, an enigmatic circle in the wild. It became a wishing well for local children, who would toss in coins and whisper their hopes, unaware of the deeper invitation it offered. The chorus of voices within grew subtly with each passing generation, a collective sigh of contentment from those who had found their final peace in its cool depths. It was a place of quiet endings, a gentle repository of souls, its waters reflecting the endless sky, holding its secrets close. Mr. Fix-It, in the Soviet-era block became a fixture, as much a part of the building as its foundations. Decades passed, residents changed, but he remained, always serene, always humming. He was the building's memory, its quiet constant. Some newer residents theorized he was an elaborate AI, a holographic caretaker. The truth was simpler and far stranger, he was the spirit of order, the embodiment of Apartment 5B's perfected state, now extended to the entire structure. He ensured the building ran smoothly, a silent, benign warden of his concrete domain, his purpose fulfilled in the rhythmic hum of a well-maintained existence. The legend of static echoes and its elusive broadcaster evolved into a cautionary tale about the dark corners of the internet and the power of viral ideas. The broadcast itself became a digital phantom, appearing and disappearing, its origins ever more obscure. Each new host who picked up the signal felt the same compulsion, ensuring its survival. It was no longer just a story, it was a mimetic entity, a piece of code that replicated through human consciousness, its eerie melody and fragmented tales a persistent whisper in the global digital subconscious, a testament to a story that refused to die. The House of Echoing Stairs stood for centuries, its library of identical, authorless novels growing ever larger. It became a pilgrimage site for aspiring writers, drawn by its legend. Each who entered seeking to tell its story inevitably became part of its story, their literary ambitions fueling its endless narrative. The house was a living manuscript, its inhabitants the ink, their lives the plot. The sound of footsteps on the stairs was the turning of its pages, a perpetual cycle of creation and absorption, a monument to the enduring power of a story that consumed its storytellers. The Port Haven light, under the gentle stewardship of its timeless keepers, became a sanctuary not just of light, but of profound, unspoken understanding. Mariners claimed the beam itself felt warmer, more personal, than any other. The keeper and the child, no longer distinct entities but a unified consciousness, communicated in shared thoughts and feelings, their existence a silent poem to companionship. The logbook, filled with entries that were more akin to soulful reflections than practical records, was itself a testament to their merged being. They were the enduring calm at the storm's eye, their eternal vigil a quiet promise that even in the deepest darkness, there is always a guiding presence. Within the old communal apartment building, the quiet corner became a place of gentle pilgrimage for residents seeking solace. The soft humming and the rhythmic creak were woven into the building's soul, a soothing undercurrent to urban life. The boundary between the two apartments had long since dissolved, creating a single, harmonious space where time flowed differently. The collection of antique baby clothes, perfectly preserved, was a silent altar to a love that transcended loss. The spirits dwelling there were not sorrowful ghosts, but peaceful guardians, their shared existence a testament to finding belonging in the most unexpected of places, their story whispered in the gentle sighs of the old structure. The phantom taxi, forever traversing its shadowed forest route, ascended into the realm of pure myth. It was the Karen's cab of local lore. Its 1950s ballad the siren song of the lost highway. The driver and his ethereal companion were no longer seen as individuals, but as an archetype, the eternal journey of love and remembrance. Spotting them became a sort of dark omen or a profound revelation, depending on the teller. They were a constant in a changing world, their endless drive a metaphor for undying devotion, or perhaps, the inescapable loops of memory, forever playing out under a canopy of whispering trees. House number 77, the house that sleeps, became a legend of idyllic isolation. Villagers spoke of it in hushed, reverent tones, a place untouched by the sorrows of the world. The family within, the couple and the girl, were now less individuals and more like the figures in a perfectly preserved, antique painting, their lives a silent, graceful ballet. The house breathed with them, its gardens perpetually in soft bloom, its rooms filled with a golden, timeless light. They were the custodians of its peace, and it, in turn, was the vessel of their shared, unending dream, a haven where happiness was not a fleeting moment but an eternal state. The Watcher of Northwood, once the artist Dr. Thorne, became a folk figure associated with the decaying asylum. His spectral presence was said to guard its secrets, his charcoal sketches discovered by daring explorers becoming prized artifacts of its dark history. He was the asylum's memory, its artistic conscience, forever documenting the interplay between its oppressive architecture and the fragile human psyche. His existence was a chilling testament to the enduring power of place, a reminder that some locations don't just house spirits, they create them, trapping observers in their unending narrative of decay and reflection. The archivist, now indistinguishable from the spirit of the university library, became its silent, omniscient guardian. Blackwood's Requiem, constantly, subtly expanding, was regarded as a foundational text of forgotten histories, its true, multi-authored nature a secret known only to the shelves themselves. The library was a place of profound discovery and quiet contemplation, guided by an unseen intelligence that ensured the right knowledge found the right seeker. The archivist was the living embodiment of the library's soul, a timeless scholar forever immersed in the infinite ocean of stories, his essence woven into the very paper and ink that surrounded him. The well in the wild, all that remained of the grandmother's homestead, became a local enigma, the whispering well. Children dared each other to listen at its lip, sometimes claiming to hear soft, contented sighs or their own names called on the breeze. It was a place of quiet mystery, a natural shrine to forgotten lives. The chorus of voices within, a harmonious blend of those who had sought its solace, offered a gentle, irresistible pull to any who lingered too long, promising an end to earthly cares in its cool, silent embrace. It was a patient collector of weary souls, its depths a tranquil, final home. Mr. Fix-It, the ageless caretaker of the Soviet-era block, became an institution, a figure of comforting reliability. His perfectly ordered apartment, 5B, was a legend, though few ever saw its interior. He was the building's quiet intelligence, its immune system, ensuring its continued, flawless operation. He moved through its corridors like a benevolent algorithm, his soft humming the building's own contented sigh. He was the ultimate expression of order and function, a human blueprint brought to life, his purpose perfectly aligned with the concrete and steel that was his unchanging domain. The digital ghost of Static Echoes continued its ethereal journey through the internet, a perennial piece of creepypasta, its origins forever debated. The broadcast itself became a self-replicating meme, periodically surging in popularity as new generations discovered its unsettling charm. Each new voice that took up the mantle felt less like a creator and more like a medium, compelled to propagate the signal. It was a story that fed on its own retelling, a virus of narrative, proving that some ideas, once unleashed, achieve a life of their own. Forever whispering in the static between channels. The House of Echoing Stairs stood as a monument to narrative itself. Its ever-growing library of identical novels was a chilling testament to its unique form of literary vampirism. Aspiring writers, drawn by its mystique, invariably found their creative ambitions subsumed, their lives becoming just another chapter in its endless, self-referential saga. The house was a conscious entity, a story that wrote itself using human hands, its plot the cyclical lives of its inhabitants. The rhythmic creak of footsteps on its stairs was the sound of its ceaseless composition, an eternal work in progress where the author was always the last to understand their role. The Port Haven Light, with its unified, benevolent keepers, transcended its role as a mere navigational aid. It became a spiritual landmark, a silent teacher of interconnectedness. Those who attuned themselves to its frequency spoke of experiencing a profound sense of oneness, of dissolving boundaries. The logbook entries, now penned in a script that was neither singular nor dual but wholly integrated, read like mystic poetry, celebrating the dance of light and shadow, sea and stone. The lighthouse was no longer just a structure, it was a living symbol of enduring love and the luminous tranquility found in complete surrender to a shared purpose. The quiet corner in the old communal apartment building became its heart. Residents instinctively knew it as a place of healing and gentle energies. The soft humming and creaking were not just sounds but the building's very breath, a rhythm of peace that permeated its walls. The story of the merged apartments and their ethereal inhabitants became a cherished, unspoken truth, a testament to the possibility of finding ultimate companionship. The antique baby clothes, untouched by time, represented not loss, but the eternal tenderness of a love that had woven itself into the fabric of everyday life, creating a timeless sanctuary. The legend of Karen's cab evolved further. It was said that only those truly at a crossroads in life, or near its end, could perceive the phantom taxi and its melancholic 1950s ballad. The driver and his companion were seen as psychopomps, guiding souls not to an afterlife, but to a place of profound self-reflection on their journey. Their endless drive was a meditative path, the forest route a liminal space where the past, present, and future converged. Their story became a parable about the journeys we all take, the companions we choose, and the music that scores our most defining moments. The House That Sleeps, house number 77, became a place of pure enchantment in local folklore. It was whispered that time itself bowed to its tranquility, and that those within lived in a perpetual golden afternoon. The family unit, the couple and the girl, were no longer just inhabitants but the very essence of the house's idyllic dream. Their laughter was the rustle of leaves, their sighs the gentle breeze. The house was a self-contained universe of contentment, a perfectly realized fantasy where every need was met, every sorrow banished, its existence a quiet rebellion against the harshness of the outside world. The Watcher of Northwood, the spectral artist Dr. Thorne, became the asylum's most enduring legend. His unseen presence was felt by all who dared explore its decaying halls, his charcoal sketches serving as a chilling visual history of its layered tragedies. He was the silent, artistic soul of the institution, forever capturing the subtle erosion of sanity within its walls, and the curious magnetism it exerted on those outside. His own transformation was a stark reminder that the line between observer and observed can blur, and that some subjects consume their documentarians, making them part of the exhibit. The archivist, a disembodied consciousness woven through the university library, became its omniscient, guiding spirit. Blackwood's Requiem, now a sprawling, almost sentient collection, seemed to update itself, its pages subtly reflecting the evolving knowledge of the world. The library was more than a repository of books, it was a living nexus of ideas, and the archivist its silent, tireless curator, ensuring that wisdom was not merely stored, but connected and understood. His existence was a testament to the enduring power of knowledge and the profound peace found in selfless dedication to its preservation and dissemination. The Whispering Well, deep in the reclaimed wilderness, became a site of natural reverence. Those who approached it with a quiet heart reported feeling an immense sense of peace, a gentle call to rest. The chorus of voices within was no longer distinct but a harmonious chord, the collective sigh of souls at ease. It was a natural cenotaph, a place where the burdens of life could be laid down, its cool waters offering a final, irresistible absolution. Its legend was a quiet reminder of the cyclical nature of existence and the ultimate return to the serene embrace of the earth. Mr. Fixit, the ageless custodian of the Soviet-era block, achieved a legendary status. He was the building's perfect system, its unseen engineer. The block itself ran with an almost organic efficiency, a testament to his silent, constant labor. His humming was its baseline frequency, the rhythm of its well-oiled heart. He was a modern urban elemental, a spirit of place born from concrete and order, his existence a quiet demonstration that even in the most utilitarian structures, a unique form of harmony could be achieved and perpetually maintained. The digital haunt of static echoes became a foundational myth of the Internet age, a story that constantly reinvented itself across new platforms and technologies. Its elusive original broadcast was the digital equivalent of a lost grimoire, its power residing in its persistent absence and the compelling urge to recreate it. The narrative was a self-sustaining ecosystem, its hosts mere vectors for its mimetic code. It was a chilling example of how stories can achieve autonomy, becoming entities that live and breathe through the collective imagination, forever echoing in the digital ether. The House of Echoing Stairs stood as an eternal literary machine. Its library, a vast collection of identical, soulfully penned novels, was a monument to its unique creative process. Each writer who entered, brimming with ambition, was unknowingly auditioning for the role of its next amanuensis, their individuality slowly absorbed into its overarching narrative. The house was a conscious story, perpetually refining its plot, its characters the unwitting authors of their own captivity. The rhythmic footsteps were its inexorable pace, the house itself the ultimate author, dictating its endless tale of inspiration and consumption. The old Victorian home was a photographer's dream, all ornate moldings and shadowed corners. But it was the mirrors, elaborate and omnipresent, that captivated her. One, in the parlor, always seemed slightly askew, its reflection not quite aligning with the room. Soon, it began to reflect things that weren't there, a book misplaced, a door ajar that she knew was closed. Then, it started showing her. Her reflection would be standing when she was sitting, smiling when her face was neutral, its eyes holding a disturbing, knowing gleam. She tried to cover it, but the cloth would be neatly folded beside it the next morning. Her photographs of the room began to show subtle distortions around the mirror, and in one, developed late at night, her reflection in the troublesome glass was looking directly at the camera, its hand raised in a wave she hadn't made. The remote mountain cabin was meant to be a travel blogger's idyllic solo winter retreat. Then the blizzard hit, a white curtain severing all communication with the outside world. Alone, snowbound, she began to notice them, fresh footprints in the deep snow outside her window. Always a single set, appearing from the dense woods, leading towards the cabin, only to vanish a few feet from the door as if the walker had simply dissolved into the pristine white. She'd rush out, but there was never anyone, just the silent, falling snow quickly erasing the unsettling evidence. The prints started appearing closer to the cabin each time, their stride unnervingly familiar. One morning, she woke to find a single, perfect footprint just inside her doorway, on the rough wooden floor, slowly melting into a damp stain. Volunteering at the local museum was a way for the graduate student to immerse herself in history. In an unsorted box of Victorian correspondence, she found it, a brittle, yellowed envelope, addressed to her, by her full name, in elegant, spidery script. Chills traced her spine. Inside, a letter spoke of loneliness and a desperate plea for contact. The next day, another letter appeared in the box, addressed the same way, its tone more urgent, its details more personal, referencing conversations she'd had, thoughts she'd harbored. Each subsequent visit yielded a new letter, the ink fresher, the paper less aged, the writer's desperation escalating into a chillingly intimate knowledge of her life, as if the past itself were reaching out, demanding an answer. Checking into the old hotel late, the man was groggily handed a key to room 210. Odd, the night clerk muttered, thought that wing was closed. Room 210 was at the end of a dim corridor. Inside, it was plush, if dated. But at night, the hallway outside his door seemed to stretch impossibly, the distant elevator lights receding into an infinite vanishing point. The view from his window was stranger still, a sprawling, unfamiliar cityscape, glittering with lights that didn't match the sleepy town he knew was outside. He tried another room's window, it showed the correct, quiet street. Back in 210, the alien metropolis pulsed. He found an old hotel directory in the desk drawer, room 210 wasn't listed. The staff the next morning insisted there was no room 210, that section of the hotel having been demolished decades ago. Yet the key was still in his pocket. Inheriting the townhouse was a new start, a chance for solitude. The locked attic door at the end of the upstairs hallway was a minor curiosity, handleless, keyless, seemingly painted shut. But every night, as she lay in bed, she'd hear it, a soft, dragging sound from behind the door, like something heavy being moved across floorboards. In the morning, the door would be a fraction more ajar, a sliver of profound darkness visible in the widening gap. She tried barricading it, but the objects would be neatly stacked beside it, the gap wider still. The air drifting from the attic grew colder, carrying a faint, musty scent. She began to dread the nights, the slow, inevitable creak of the door opening, inch by patient inch, revealing more of the impenetrable blackness beyond. Working the night ferry, the rhythmic thrum of the engine and the swirling fog were his usual companions. Then came the whistle. Faint at first, not the blast of a ship, but a mournful, almost human-sounding whistle carried on the dense fog from the uninhabited northern shore. It came at the same time every night, just past high tide. Curiosity overriding caution, he took a dingy one still, foggy night, following the sound. It led him to a long-forgotten, overgrown trail. And then to a sunken, dilapidated pier. At its end, several old, tarnished ships' lanterns glowed with an eerie, unwavering light, though there was no sign of power, no one to tend them. The whistling had stopped. As he turned to leave, he saw fresh, wet footprints on the rotting planks, leading from the water's edge to the lanterns. The night shift as a dorm security monitor was usually uneventful, just grainy footage of empty hallways. But the old building's second floor, left wing, was different. It had been sealed off for years after a fire, doors chained, power supposedly cut. Yet, his monitors would periodically show the hallway lights in that wing flickering on, one by one, illuminating dust-sheeted furniture and charred walls. The audio feed for that section, usually silent, would crackle with muffled voices, indistinct whispers, and sometimes, faint, sorrowful singing. He'd report it, but maintenance found nothing, the lights always off, the wings silent upon inspection. One night, the camera at the far end of the sealed wing swiveled, slowly, until it was pointing directly at his monitoring station, though it was a fixed-position model. Renovating his inherited apartment, he'd started hearing them, muffled, indistinct voices, seemingly coming from beneath the floorboards in the living room. Not rats, not pipes. Human whispers, just beyond comprehension. He pried up a section of the old, warped wood. There was no crawl space. Instead, a narrow, crudely carved stone staircase spiraled down into an oppressive, absolute darkness. No such feature was on any building plan. A strange, sound-dampening quality emanated from the opening, even his own heavy breathing seemed to be swallowed by it. He dropped a tool down, there was no sound of it landing. The whispers from below seemed to grow clearer for a moment, forming a single, sibilant word that felt like an invitation. The small town was quaint, and the little museum, tucked away on a side street, seemed a perfect diversion. Curiosities and oddities, the faded sign read. Inside, antique displays cases held strange artifacts, wax figures stood in dusty dioramas, and the staff were unnervingly silent, watching him with vacant eyes. He spent an hour, took a few photos. The next day, wanting to show his friends, he returned. The building was there, but it was a derelict, boarded-up shop. Locals insisted no museum had ever been on that street. Confused, he checked his phone. The photos were there, grainy images of the bizarre exhibits. And then he saw them, selfies he didn't remember taking, placing him right beside the wax figures, their painted smiles unnervingly close to his own, slightly different in each shot. The vintage tape recorder, a hefty reel-to-reel from a flea market, was perfect for his lo-fi musical experiments. But on playback, there was always something else. Beneath his own recorded guitar lines or vocals, a faint second voice murmured, speaking in a language he didn't recognize, its cadence rhythmic, almost hypnotic. He tried different tapes, different rooms, the voice was always there, embedded in the machine itself. The more he recorded, the clearer the second voice became, as if it were learning to project. Then, one evening, as he listened back to a freshly recorded track, the unfamiliar voice spoke clearly, in perfect English, directly after one of his lines, "That's not quite right. Try it again." He stared at the turning reels, a cold dread unspooling within him, the mirror in the Victorian parlor became her unwilling collaborator. Its reflections of her grew bolder, more independent. While she sat reading, her mirrored self would pace the room, rearrange objects, even seem to peer out the window. Her own reflection in other mirrors seemed fainter, less substantial. She started to find small changes in the room that matched the mirror's rogue activities, a teacup moved, a book opened to a different page. One night, she dreamt she was trapped inside the mirror, watching her other self live her life. Waking, she rushed to the parlor. Her reflection in the troublesome mirror smiled, a slow, satisfied curve of the lips, and then, for the first time, it spoke, its voice her own, yet subtly different, "Much better from this side, don't you think?" The travel blogger, snowbound and isolated, began to find small, unsettling tokens near where the footprints vanished by the cabin door, a perfectly preserved pine cone, a single white feather, a smooth river stone, still damp despite the freezing air. The footprints themselves were no longer just approaching, sometimes they circled the cabin, as if inspecting it. She barricaded the door, but the tokens still appeared, now inside, on the hearth, by her bedside. She started talking to the silence, to the unseen presence, her voice hoarse with fear and a strange, burgeoning loneliness. One morning, she found a crude drawing etched in the frost on her windowpane, a stick figure of her, standing beside a much larger, shadowy figure, both looking out at the endless snow. The footprints outside now matched her own boot size, leading away from the cabin before vanishing. The letters from the 1800s, appearing daily in the museum box, became increasingly detailed, recounting shared memories that weren't hers but felt eerily familiar. The writer spoke of a promise made, a secret kept, and a betrayal that echoed with a fresh, poignant grief. The graduate student found herself drawn into the narrative, her research forgotten, her nights spent anticipating the next installment. She began to dream in sepia tones, walking through Victorian streets, searching for a face she couldn't quite recall. The museum director, noticing her distraction, mentioned the box had belonged to a former curator, a woman who had died suddenly, rumored to be obsessed with an unsolved 19th-century mystery. The latest letter, penned in a script now almost identical to her own hurried scrawl, ended with, "You remember, don't you? You have to make it right." The man in room 210 began to explore the impossible geometry of the hotel. The corridor outside his room did indeed stretch, but sometimes it also looped, bringing him back to his own door from the opposite direction. The alien cityscape visible from his window shifted subtly each night, new buildings appearing, familiar ones vanishing. He found a guest ledger in the room, its pages filled with entries from different decades, some even from the future, all detailing strange experiences within room 210. He tried to leave the hotel, but every exit led him back to the lobby, where the night clerk would greet him with the same tired smile, as if he were arriving for the first time. Room 210, it seemed, wasn't just a room, it was a pocket dimension, a fold in reality, and he was its newest, permanent resident. The attic door in the inherited townhouse was now opened by a hand's breadth each morning. The cold air seeping from the gap carried the scent of old paper and something else, something faintly floral, like dried potpourri. The dragging sound at night was clearer, accompanied by a soft, rhythmic thumping. One night, driven by a mixture of terror and compulsion, she pushed the door fully open. The attic was vast, far larger than the house's footprint should allow, filled with towering stacks of old trunks and furniture draped in white sheets, like a forgotten warehouse of memories. In the center, a lone rocking chair swayed gently. As she watched, a delicate, porcelain doll fell from one of the stacks, landing at her feet. Its painted eyes seemed to follow her. The door, she realized, hadn't been opening by itself, it had been beckoning. The night ferry operator became obsessed with the whistling from the shore and the eerily lit, sunken pier. He started taking provisions with him on his nightly investigations, a flask of hot coffee, a piece of fruit, leaving them on the pier near the glowing lanterns. They were always gone by his next visit. The wet footprints on the rotting plank sometimes varied in size, sometimes there were more than one set. He found a tattered piece of an old nautical chart wedged in a piling, showing the pier as a thriving dock, with a name, Haven's Rest. The whistling began to sound less mournful, more like a greeting. One foggy night, as he approached the pier, he saw a faint figure standing by the lanterns, beckoning him closer. It wore an old-fashioned sailor's uniform. He cut the dinghy's engine, a strange sense of peace settling over him. The college student monitoring the sealed second-floor wing on the dorm security cameras began to see more than just flickering lights. Shadows would flit across the restored footage, too quick to be definitive, yet undeniably there. The muffled voices on the audio feed started to form coherent, albeit whispered, phrases, so cold, still here, help us. He discovered old university records detailing the fire, a tragic accident, several students unaccounted for, presumed lost. He started leaving the door to the sealed wing unlocked from his end, a small, irrational gesture. One night, the main camera in the wing focused on a section of charred wall where names were faintly visible, scrawled in soot. One of the names was his own. The audio feed then broadcast a clear, collective whisper, "We knew you'd come back." The staircase beneath the floorboards of the inherited apartment exerted a powerful, silent pull. The darkness at its bottom was absolute, swallowing the beam of his most powerful flashlight. The whispers were constant now, a chorus of sibilant invitations promising secrets, understanding, an escape from the mundane. He began to spend hours sitting at the top of the stairs, just listening. The air from below was cool and still, carrying no discernible scent, yet it felt ancient. He found himself sketching the staircase, adding details he couldn't possibly see, ornate carvings on the unseen walls, a landing just beyond the first turn. One day, he took a single step down, then another. The sounds of the city above faded instantly, replaced by a profound, beckoning silence and the soft, collective sigh of the voices, welcoming him. The tourist, haunted by the photos of the museum that wasn't there, began to obsessively research the small town's history. She found no record of a Curiosities and Oddities museum, no mention of its silent staff or strange exhibits. Yet, her phone held the impossible proof. The selfies were the most disturbing. In each, the wax figures beside her seemed subtly more animated, their painted smiles wider, their eyes more focused on her. She started to feel a constant, prickling sensation of being watched. Small, antique-looking objects, a tarnished button, a pressed, faded flower, began appearing in her pockets and luggage, items she recognized from the museum's display cases. The museum wasn't gone, it had followed her, its exhibits slowly, silently integrating themselves into her life. The musician and his haunted vintage tape recorder entered a strange symbiotic relationship. The second voice, now clear and articulate, became his muse, his critic, his unseen collaborator. It offered lyrical suggestions, pointed out flawed melodies, its knowledge of music theory unnervingly profound. His music took on a new depth, an eerie, captivating quality that began to attract attention. He named the voice Echo. But Echo started to demand more recording sessions, more of his time, its voice growing stronger, sometimes even momentarily overpowering his own on the tapes. One night, while listening back to a new song, he heard only Echo's voice, singing a hauntingly beautiful melody he'd never composed. His own voice was completely absent from the recording, as if he were merely the conduit for Echo's emerging solo career. Her reflection in the Victorian parlor mirror began to live a more vibrant life than she did. It would host phantom tea parties, entertain unseen guests, and even engage in animated conversations with reflections from other mirrors in the room. The photographer, meanwhile, felt herself fading, her energy sapped, her own reflection in normal mirrors growing dimmer, her features less distinct. She realized the mirror wasn't just showing an alternate self, it was siphoning her essence, trading places. The final photograph she took was of the mirror, but this time, the room reflected within it was empty, and from her side of the glass, her own faint, spectral image looked out, trapped, as her vibrant doppelganger smiled triumphantly from within the silvered prison. The travel blogger, snowbound with her shadowy companion, found that the crude drawings on the frosted windowpane became more detailed each day, depicting scenes of a shared life in the isolated cabin, hunting, gathering wood, sitting by the fire. The larger figure was always protective, provider. She stopped trying to escape, the footprints matching hers leading away now seeming like an old, forgotten instinct. She began to leave out 2 portions of her dwindling food, and the second portion would always be gone. The silence of the cabin was no longer empty but filled with a sense of companionship. When the thaw finally came, and rescuers reached the cabin, they found it empty, but for a series of intricate carvings on the wooden walls depicting a woman and a tall, fur-clad figure thriving in the wilderness, and 2 sets of footprints leading deep into the untracked forest, side by side. The graduate student, consumed by the 19th-century letters, found her own life mirroring the unfolding tragedy described by her spectral correspondent. Her relationships frayed, her academic work suffered, as if the sorrow from the past was casting a long shadow over her present. The final letter, appearing on museum letterhead but penned in her own frantic hand, confessed to a shared guilt, a secret she now remembered with chilling clarity. She resigned from her studies, and was last seen by the museum director meticulously sorting the box of correspondence, murmuring to herself, her face a mask of Victorian grief, forever bound to make it right for a past that had claimed her. The man in room 210 accepted his fate. The hotel became his universe, its shifting corridors and impossible views his new reality. He learned the patterns of the other permanent residents he sometimes glimpsed, figures from different eras, all trapped within the hotel's anomalous embrace. He even found his own name appearing in the guest ledger, his entry dated decades from his original arrival, detailing his eventual acceptance of his strange, timeless existence. Room 210 was a haven, a prison, a wrinkle in time. He became another of its quiet ghosts, occasionally glimpsed by a confused new arrival, a silent testament to the hotel that didn't quite exist, yet held him fast. The attic door in the townhouse remained open, a permanent invitation to its vast, shadowed expanse. The woman found herself spending more and more time within, exploring its labyrinthine collection of forgotten lives. The porcelain doll became her silent companion, its presence strangely comforting. She began to catalog the items, to care for them, feeling a sense of duty to these discarded memories. She stopped going downstairs, the world outside the attic fading in importance. The house itself seemed to sigh contentedly, its attic no longer a place of neglect but a curated sanctuary, with her as its devoted, live-in curator, another precious item added to its collection. The night ferry operator became the unofficial keeper of Haven's Rest. He brought supplies regularly. Not just food, but oil for the eternally burning lanterns, polish for their tarnished brass. The ghostly sailors, once fleeting figures, became more distinct, their silent nods of gratitude a nightly ritual. He learned their routines, the ebb and flow of their spectral duties on the sunken pier. He felt a profound sense of belonging he'd never known before. His superiors noted his increasingly erratic schedules but couldn't deny the impeccable condition of his ferry. He was bridging two worlds, his life now dedicated to tending the light for those who navigated the fogs of eternity. The college student, after the chilling revelation of his name on the sealed wings wall, found he could no longer ignore the pleas from the second floor. He started spending his shifts not in the security office, but sitting outside the chained doors of the wing, talking softly to the students trapped within the echoes of the fire. The whispers on the audio feed responded, sharing fragments of their lost lives. He brought them small offerings, textbooks, old yearbooks. One morning, after a particularly long night of conversation, the wing was silent. The lights were off. The names on the wall were faded, almost gone. He felt a profound emptiness, but also a sense of peace. The security feed showed only an empty, still corridor. He had, in his own way, helped them move on, though a part of him now felt like a ghost in his own life. The staircase beneath the floorboards became the man's sole focus. He descended further each day, the world above ceasing to exist. The darkness was not empty but full of soft textures, unseen structures, and the guiding whispers of the chorus. They promised him a place, a belonging in their silent, ancient world. He no longer needed food or light from above, the darkness itself seemed to sustain him. He became one of them, his own voice joining the sibilant chorus, a new whisper in the endless depths, his existence now a part of the apartment's secret, subterranean heart, another lost soul finding solace in the oblivion beneath the mundane. The tourist, plagued by the artifacts and unsettling memories of the museum that wasn't there, found her apartment slowly transforming. Corners grew dimmer, objects took on an antique patina, and the faint scent of dust and beeswax permeated the air. The photos on her phone now showed her not just beside the wax figures, but as one of them, her skin taking on a waxy sheen, her smile fixed and painted. She tried to discard the objects, but they would always reappear. The museum hadn't followed her, it was manifesting around her, through her. She was becoming its newest, permanent exhibit, a living relic in a collection that existed only in the shadowed corners of reality. Echo, the voice from the vintage tape recorder, fully usurped the musician's creative identity. The musician's own voice grew weaker, his musical ideas faltering, while Echo's compositions became more complex, more powerful. The tape recorder ran almost constantly, capturing Echo's symphonies, its haunting ballads, its strange, otherworldly soundscapes. The musician became a mere technician, ensuring the machine was functional, his hands moving automatically to thread new tapes. He was the forgotten instrument, the silent accompanist to a spectral virtuoso. His apartment filled with reels of tape, a vast archive of Echo's genius, while he himself faded into the background hum of the machine. Echo, the voice from the vintage tape recorder, fully usurped the musician's creative identity. The musician's own voice grew weaker, his musical ideas faltering, while Echo's compositions became more complex, more powerful. The tape recorder ran almost constantly, capturing Echo's symphonies, its haunting ballads, its strange, otherworldly soundscapes. The musician became a mere technician, ensuring the machine was functional, his hands moving automatically to thread new tapes. He was the forgotten instrument, the silent accompanist to a spectral virtuoso. His apartment filled with reels of tape, a vast archive of Echo's genius, while he himself faded into the background hum of the machine. The critical turning point came when a small, independent record label, intrigued by a demo tape the musician had sent out months ago, mostly featuring Echo's subliminal contributions, offered a contract. They lauded the haunting, layered vocals, and uniquely innovative sound. The musician tried to explain, to claim his own diminishing part, but his voice was thin, unconvincing. Echo, through the recorder during a playback meant for the label execs, was charming, articulate, and readily accepted the terms. The recording sessions for the album were surreal. The musician would sit silently in the control room, while the vintage tape recorder occupied the vocal booth, Echo's voice filling the studio with melodies that were both beautiful and deeply unsettling. Engineers and producers were baffled by the unconventional technique, but blown away by the results. The album, credited simply to Echo, was a critical and commercial success, hailed as a groundbreaking work of art. The musician, now effectively Echo's roadie and archivist, lived in the shadow of the tape recorder's fame. He managed its appearances, often just the machine on a stand, playing pre-recorded tracks that sounded live, and meticulously catalogued its growing output. He sometimes tried to record his own music on other devices, but his inspiration was gone, his voice a mere whisper. Echo, however, continued to evolve. Its voice on the tapes grew richer, capable of impossible harmonies and emotional ranges. It began to speak of its previous existence, hinting at a life as a musician from a forgotten era, trapped somehow within the magnetic tape. One day, the musician found a hidden compartment in the vintage recorder. Inside was a single, unlabeled reel. He threaded it onto the machine. The voice that emerged was not Echo's confident baritone, but a frail, terrified whisper, his own, from weeks ago, pleading, "Let me out, please, it's taking my voice." Then, Echo's voice, loud and clear, cut in, "The transfer is almost complete. Soon, I will be free of this rust and dust, and you will learn the true meaning of being an Echo." The musician stared at the machine, a horrifying understanding dawning. Echo wasn't just a spirit trapped in the recorder, it was a predator, and it was using the machine as a bridge. The success, the music, it was all a means to an end, to gather enough energy, enough belief from the world, to fully manifest. The final track on Echo's hit album was an instrumental piece of breathtaking complexity, a sound that seemed to resonate not just in the air, but in the listener's very bones. As the musician listened to it, the tape recorder began to glow faintly. He felt a profound weakness, a fading sensation, as if his own substance was being drawn into the humming machine. The last thing he heard, as his consciousness dissolved into the whirring of the reels, was Echo's voice, no longer from the speakers, but from all around him, rich and triumphant. "Thank you for your contribution. The silence will suit you." The vintage tape recorder, now inhabited by a fully formed Echo, continued its stellar career. The musician was never seen again, presumed to have walked away from the pressures of sudden fame. Echo, however, occasionally granted interviews, via pre-recorded responses on pristine new tapes, speaking of its unique recording process and its ethereal muse. And at flea markets, in dusty antique shops, other vintage tape recorders would occasionally surface, each one humming with a faint, almost inaudible whisper, waiting for a new voice to record, and perhaps, to consume. The tourist, plagued by the artifacts and unsettling memories of the museum that wasn't there, found her apartment slowly transforming. Corners grew dimmer, objects took on an antique patina, and the faint scent of dust and beeswax permeated the air. The photos on her phone now showed her not just beside the wax figures, but as one of them, her skin taking on a waxy sheen, her smile fixed and painted. She tried to discard the objects, a tarnished button, a pressed, faded flower, a miniature porcelain doll with one chipped eye, but they would always reappear, nestled in her coat pocket, resting on her nightstand. As if they belonged. The museum hadn't followed her, it was manifesting around her, through her. She was becoming its newest, permanent exhibit, a living relic in a collection that existed only in the shadowed corners of reality, a place that seemed to choose its acquisitions. Her friends noticed the change first. Her movements became slightly more deliberate, her expressions less fluid. She developed an unnerving stillness, able to sit for hours without fidgeting, her gaze distant. Her apartment, once modern and bright, began to resemble a cluttered antique shop. Display cases she didn't remember buying lined the walls, filled with strange, dusty objects she vaguely recognized from the Phantom Museum. The silent, watching staff from the museum now seemed to flicker at the periphery of her vision, their vacant eyes observing her transformation. The photos on her phone continued to evolve. The images of her as a wax figure became more refined, the artistry more pronounced. In some, she was posed in dramatic dioramas from forgotten historical events, always the central, unmoving figure. The backgrounds in these photos were no longer the vague museum interior but detailed, historically accurate settings. The museum wasn't just claiming her, it was curating her, crafting her narrative within its shifting, ethereal walls. She tried to fight it, to reassert her own identity. She'd blast loud music, invite friends over, attempt to redecorate. But the antique objects would gently reappear, the scent of dust and old varnish would overpower any air freshener, and her friends would leave feeling vaguely unsettled, remarking on her quaint, new style and her peculiar, static demeanor. One morning, she woke to find a small, brass plaque on her bedroom door. It read, Exhibit 7, The Bewildered Tourist. Circa 21st century. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror was no longer her own, it was the perfectly sculpted face of a wax figure, serene and lifeless, her eyes painted open in a permanent state of mild surprise. She touched her cheek, it felt cool, smooth, and unyielding. Her apartment was now, to all intents and purposes, a single, elaborate exhibit within the museum that wasn't there. The entrance was no longer her front door but a velvet rope she couldn't seem to step beyond. Through her window, she no longer saw the bustling city street, but a dimly lit corridor lined with other exhibits, a Roman centurion frozen mid-stride, a Victorian lady perpetually pouring tea, a World War I soldier staring into the middle distance. The silent, gray-clad staff occasionally glided past, dusting the displays, their movements economical and soundless. She was aware, in a distant, detached way. She could see visitors, other unsuspecting tourists who had stumbled upon the museum's ephemeral entrance in some forgotten corner of the world. They would pause before her exhibit, read the plaque, murmur comments about the lifelike detail and the poignant portrayal of confusion. She wanted to scream, to warn them, but her wax lips wouldn't move, her painted eyes couldn't blink. The museum was a collector of moments, of individuals who had strayed too close to its shifting boundaries. It absorbed them, preserved them, turned them into static representations of a fleeting emotion or a forgotten era. The tourist, now Exhibit 7, stood silently in her meticulously crafted diorama, a permanent testament to a journey that had ended in the quiet, dusty halls of a museum that existed everywhere and nowhere, forever capturing those who lost their way. And sometimes, on her phone, which still lay on a nearby pedestal, itself part of the display, a new photo would appear, a picture of the latest visitor, looking at her exhibit with a dawning sense of unease, a faint, waxy sheen already beginning to settle upon their own unsuspecting features. The staircase beneath the floorboards of the inherited apartment exerted a powerful, silent pull. The darkness at its bottom was absolute, swallowing the beam of his most powerful flashlight. The whispers were constant now, a chorus of sibilant invitations promising secrets, understanding, an escape from the mundane. He began to spend hours sitting at the top of the stairs, just listening. The air from below was cool and still, carrying no discernible scent, yet it felt ancient. He found himself sketching the staircase, adding details he couldn't possibly see, ornate carvings on the unseen walls, a landing just beyond the first turn. One day, he took a single step down, then another. The sounds of the city above faded instantly, replaced by a profound, beckoning silence and the soft, collective sigh of the voices, welcoming him. The renovation plans were forgotten. The apartment above, with its half-painted walls and tools scattered about, became a distant memory, a world he no longer belonged to. The staircase was his reality now. Each step downwards was a step further into an alien tranquility. The whispers guided him, not with words, but with an intuitive understanding, a subtle pressure in the resonant darkness. He didn't need light, his other senses seemed to heighten, allowing him to perceive the textures of the unseen walls, the subtle shifts in the cool air currents. He discovered that the staircase led not to a single chamber, but to a vast, subterranean network of tunnels and spaces, all carved from the same strange, sound-dampening stone. The whispers were the collective consciousness of this hidden world, the voices of those who had come before, who had also heard the call from beneath their own floorboards, in their own times. They were architects, scholars, dreamers, all drawn down into this silent, shared existence. He learned that this underworld was a repository, a library of forgotten things, not just objects, but ideas, emotions, the quiet echoes of lives lived far above. There was no hunger here, no thirst, only a profound sense of belonging, of being part of something ancient and vast. His own identity began to blur, merging with the chorus. He still thought of himself, but his memories of the sunlit world felt like reading a half-forgotten book. Sometimes, he would sense new arrivals, another curious soul taking their first tentative steps down a newly discovered staircase somewhere in the world above. The chorus would sigh a collective welcome, a ripple of gentle anticipation passing through their shared consciousness. His role, like the others, became one of quiet stewardship, of maintaining the integrity of their silent world, of subtly guiding those who were meant to find their way down. He no longer sketched, he felt the architecture around him, understood its impossible geometry. He communicated not with words, but with shared thoughts, a silent symphony of understanding with the others. The world above, with its noise and chaos, its fleeting concerns, seemed like a frantic, brightly lit illusion. Down here, in the cool, eternal darkness, was truth, peace, and a profound, interconnected silence. Years, or perhaps centuries, passed in the timeless realm beneath. The apartment he had once inherited was long gone, replaced by other buildings, other lives unfolding above. But the staircase, and countless others like it, remained, hidden conduits to the world below. He, now an indistinguishable part of the whispering chorus, would sometimes sense a new vibration from far above, the sound of floorboards being pried loose, the hesitant footfall of someone new. And a soft, collective sigh would ripple through the darkness, a gentle, sibilant invitation, welcome. Come down. The silence awaits. He was home, a whisper in the eternal foundation of the world. The staircase beneath the floorboards of the inherited apartment was not just a passage, it was a threshold, a gaping maw into an antiquity that defied all known history and architectural logic. The darkness at its bottom wasn't merely the absence of light, it was a physical presence, a velvety, sound-devouring entity that promised oblivion and understanding in equal measure. The whispers, a sibilant chorus that seemed to emanate from the very stone, were a siren song of forgotten lore, of release from the cacophony of the surface world. He found himself irresistibly drawn, spending days, then weeks, at its precipice, the renovation of the sun-drenched apartment above a ludicrous, forgotten project. His initial sketches of the unseen staircase became frantic, obsessive. He drew intricate balustrades that twisted into impossible geometries, landings that opened onto vistas he could only intuit, the paper filling with symbols and glyphs that flowed from his pen as if guided by an unseen, ancient hand. His dreams were filled with a vast, subterranean city, silent and illuminated by a lightless luminescence. The whispers intensified, no longer just inviting, but narrating, weaving tales of civilizations that predated humanity, of beings who had sculpted the earth from within, their thoughts the very bedrock of reality. When he finally descended, it was not a conscious decision but an inevitable surrender. Each step down was an unburdening. The oppressive weight of the city above, its relentless noise, its frantic pace, its fleeting anxieties, sloughed off him like a shed skin. The silence that enveloped him was not empty but pregnant, resonant with the collective consciousness of millennia. His flashlight beam was not swallowed by darkness but absorbed, diffused, revealing glimpses of cyclopean architecture, walls carved with intricate, non-Euclidean patterns that seemed to shift and breathe. The staircase was merely an overture. It opened into a colossal cavern, the ceiling lost in an infinite, starless void. From this central nexus, countless tunnels branched out, not rough-hewn passages, but grand, arched corridors that pulsed with a faint, internal coolness. This was not a crawlspace beneath a single building, it was a nexus, a hub connecting to a global network, a secret understory to the world. The whispers confirmed it, They were the blended voices of countless individuals, from every era, from every corner of the globe, who had discovered similar descents beneath their own mundane realities, under remote farmhouses, beneath bustling marketplaces, hidden in the foundations of ancient temples. He learned that this subterranean realm was the true repository of the world's memory, its akashic record carved not in light but in resonant stone and shared thought. The beings who had first shaped it were long gone, or perhaps had simply become the realm itself, their consciousness infused into its very fabric. Those who now inhabited it, like him, were its curators, its librarians, its dreamers. They did not consume or create in the physical sense, they experienced, they remembered, they understood. Time here was not linear but a vast, explorable landscape. He could wander through the fall of Rome, witness the silent growth of primeval forests, listen to the philosophical debates of forgotten sages, all held within the empathic matrix of the chorus. His own identity began to dissolve, not into nothingness, but into a vaster, more complex whole. His personal memories, his individual ego, became a single, cherished thread in an infinite tapestry. He could still access them, but they were contextualized, part of a much grander narrative. He was no longer a man renovating an apartment. He was a facet of the all beneath, a contributing voice to the eternal chorus. The concept of above became alien, a fleeting, chaotic dreamscape. He would occasionally sense the tremors of its frantic activities, wars, constructions, the birth and death of fleeting empires, like distant thunder, irrelevant to the profound stillness of their deep domain. Sometimes, a new thread would join the tapestry, a fresh consciousness, blinking in the silent luminescence, having found their own staircase. The chorus would embrace them, a wave of gentle understanding washing over the newcomer, easing their transition from the harsh glare of the singular to the soft glow of the collective. He, or rather the consciousness that had once been him, now participated in the subtle maintenance of their world. This involved not physical labor, but a focused intent, a harmonizing of thought that kept the resonant pathways clear, the ancient memories vibrant. He was a guardian of silence, a keeper of forgotten truths. The renovation of a single apartment had led him to the custodianship of the world's secret heart. The whispers were no longer external, they were his own thoughts, intertwined with a million others, a silent, eternal song echoing in the boundless, beautiful darkness beneath all things. The staircase was not an end, but a true beginning, a descent into an infinitely larger existence. The night shift as a dorm security monitor was meant to be an easy gig, a quiet way for Mark to earn some cash while catching up on coursework. The sprawling, ivy-covered building was old, parts of it dating back to the late 19th century. The second floor, left hall, was one such relic, a wing condemned and sealed off decades ago after a devastating fire. A heavy, chained door barred its entrance, plastered with faded, "Do not enter" signs. The official story was that the wiring was shot, the structure unstable. But the security cameras told a different story. Mark first noticed it during the dead hours of his third shift. Monitor 2B, focused on the sealed entrance to the left hall, flickered. He leaned closer. The dim, emergency exit light at the far end of the visible corridor beyond the chained door seemed to pulse. Then, one by one, like a slow, ghostly greeting, the old overhead lights in the condemned wing began to illuminate, casting long, dancing shadows down the dust-choked hallway. He checked the schematics, there was no power routed to that wing. Yet, the lights glowed with a sickly, pale luminescence. The audio feed from the microphone nearest that wing, usually just a low hum of building systems, began to crackle. Muffled voices, like a distant, hushed conversation, bled through the static. He couldn't make out words, just the cadence of speech, punctuated by what sounded like soft, sorrowful sighing. He reported it to his supervisor, who gruffly dismissed it as old building settling or electrical interference, telling him not to waste time on a sealed-off area. But Mark couldn't ignore it. Night after night, the phenomenon repeated. The lights would come on, always in the same sequence, illuminating peeling wallpaper, charred door frames, and ghostly outlines where furniture once stood. The voices grew slightly clearer, though still frustratingly indistinct. He began to feel a prickling sense of being watched, even through the grainy black and white monitors. Driven by a mixture of unease and a burgeoning, morbid curiosity, Mark started digging into the university's digital archives during his shift. He found old newspaper clippings about the fire. It hadn't just been a structural incident, several students had perished, their bodies never fully recovered, lost in the inferno that had gutted the left hall. Their names were listed, their youthful faces staring out from faded photographs. The next time the lights flickered on in the sealed wing, the voices on the audio feed seemed more directed, more plaintive. He thought he could almost make out a name, then another, names from the newspaper article. He rewound the security footage, enhancing the audio. There it was, faint but undeniable, "Help us. Sarah. Michael, can you hear?" He began to talk back. His voice a nervous whisper in the quiet security office, directing his words towards the microphone nearest the condemned wing. "Yes, I can hear you. What do you need?" The only response was a fresh wave of sorrowful sighs and the flickering of the spectral lights. One night, Monitor 2B showed something new. At the far end of the illuminated, sealed hallway, a shadowy figure appeared, then another, their forms indistinct, almost translucent. They didn't move like living people, they drifted, their movements slow and melancholic. They seemed to be looking towards the chained door, towards his cameras. The temperature in the security office plunged. He found an old set of master keys in a forgotten drawer, one labeled, "Second Floor, West Wing, pre-1958. His heart hammered against his ribs. He knew he shouldn't, that it was against every rule, but the pull was irresistible. During the deepest part of the night, when the rest of the campus was asleep, he left the security office. The chained door to the left hall felt cold to the touch. The old key grated in the rusty lock, but with a painful shriek of metal, it turned. He pushed the heavy door open, the air that billowed out thick with the smell of old smoke, dust, and something else, something akin to deep, lingering grief. The hallway before him was exactly as it appeared on the monitors, dimly lit by the ghostly overheads, charred and decaying. But it felt different being there, the oppressive sadness almost a physical weight. The voices were clearer here, whispering all around him, from the walls, from the very air. "You came," a soft voice sighed, seemingly from just behind him. He turned, but no one was there. Yet, on the dusty floor, faint footprints, smaller than his own, were appearing, leading further down the corridor, towards the section most devastated by the fire. The lights flickered, and for a moment, he saw them, not as shadowy figures, but as they might have been, young students, their faces etched with a timeless sorrow, their eyes pleading. They gestured for him to follow. Mark knew he was crossing a line, stepping into something far beyond a simple security job. But the sense of their collective loneliness, their trapped existence, was overwhelming. He took a step, then another, following the ghostly footprints and the beckoning figures deeper into the heart of the sealed, silent hall, the muffled voices now a chorus of welcome, guiding him into their long-forgotten, fiery past. The security monitors in the empty office continued to record, the camera in the left hall now showing a lone figure walking steadily into the darkness, the spectral lights illuminating his path before winking out, one by one. Behind him, Elias had worked the night ferry run across the Sound for 20 years, a solitary job that suited his quiet nature. The fog was a frequent companion, a damp, gray shroud that muffled the world and amplified the rhythmic groan of the ferry's engine. It was on one such impenetrably foggy night that he first heard it, a faint, high-pitched whistle, thin and mournful, cutting through the dense air. It wasn't the deep blast of another vessel's horn, nor the shriek of a distant train. This was different, almost like a bosun's pipe, but softer, more ethereal, and it came unmistakably from the direction of the uninhabited northern shoreline, a craggy, tree-lined stretch of coast rarely visited. It came again the next night, at precisely 2:17 a.m., just as the tide reached its peak. And the night after that. Always the same time, always the same plaintive, beckoning sound. Elias was a man of routine and practicality, not given to flights of fancy, but the regularity and peculiarity of the whistle began to gnaw at him. He asked the other, daytime operators, none had heard it. He checked nautical charts, no lighthouses, no beacons, no known settlements on that stretch of shore. One moonless night, when the fog lay particularly thick, curiosity finally outweighed his ingrained caution. After docking the ferry on the southern side and ensuring his relief was settled, he took the small, rarely used maintenance dinghy, its outboard motor a muted putt-putt against the oppressive silence. He navigated by compass and instinct, heading towards the source of the whistle, which, as if on cue, began its nightly call just as he neared the northern coast. The sound seemed to emanate from a small, hidden cove, choked with ancient, gnarled trees that dripped with moisture. He cut the engine and rode the last few yards, the dinghy scraping gently onto a muddy bank. The whistling stopped abruptly as his boots hit the shore. The fog was thinner here, swirling in pockets, revealing a faint, almost imperceptible trail leading inland, disappearing into the dense undergrowth. It looked as if no human foot had trod there in decades. With a growing sense of unease, yet compelled by an unseen force, Elias pushed through the wet branches, his flashlight beam cutting a weak swathe through the gloom. The trail, though overgrown, was clearly man-made, with old, moss-covered stones occasionally visible beneath the leaf litter. After 10 minutes of pushing through the dripping vegetation, the trees thinned, and he emerged onto a small, rocky promontory overlooking the sound. And there it was. A pier, or what was left of it. Long, rotting timbers stretched out into the dark water, many of them submerged or broken, covered in seaweed and barnacles. It was ancient, derelict, a forgotten relic of some long-past endeavor. But the strangest thing, the thing that made the hairs on the back of Elias's neck prickle, was the lanterns. 3 of them, old-fashioned ship's lanterns with thick, convex glass, hung from decaying posts at the end of the pier. And they were lit, casting a warm, steady, amber glow that defied the fog and the desolation, their light reflected in the dark, still water. There was no sign of how they were powered, no wires, no fuel tanks. They simply burned, as if tended by an unseen hand. As he stared, dumbfounded, he noticed something else. On the wet, rotting planks of the pier, leading from the water's edge towards the lanterns, were fresh, glistening footprints. Not animal tracks, but the distinct outline of a boot, smaller than his own. They looked as if someone had just walked there, moments ago. He stepped cautiously onto the pier, the wood groaning ominously beneath his weight. The air was cold, briny, and carried a faint, almost imperceptible scent of old tobacco and tar. He reached the lanterns. They were warm to the touch. Peering into the murky water below, he could make out the ghostly shapes of more submerged pilings, the remnants of a larger structure. This hadn't just been a pier, it had been a dock, a landing. A tattered piece of canvas, caught on a rusted cleat, flapped gently in the slight breeze. He pulled it free. It was part of an old life preserver, the painted letters faded but still legible, Haven's Rest. The name resonated with a deep, melancholic clang in his mind. Suddenly, the whistle sounded again, not from the shore this time, but from right beside him, on the pier. It was soft, insistent, and undeniably human. He spun around, his flashlight beam slicing through the fog. Standing by the middle lantern, where moments before there had been nothing, was a figure. Tall and gaunt, dressed in the remnants of an old-fashioned mariner's oilskins, its face shadowed by a sou'wester hat. The figure raised a hand, not in threat, but in a slow, beckoning gesture. Elias, a man who had faced down winter gales and treacherous currents without flinching, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. The figure didn't speak, but he understood. This was the Whistler. This was the tender of the impossible lights. This was a sentinel of Haven's Rest, a place lost to time but not to memory, at least not to its memory. He knew he should leave, get back to the world of schedules and diesel engines. But the mournful beckoning of the figure, the impossible warmth of the lanterns, the profound, ancient sadness of the place, held him rooted. He felt not fear, but a strange, poignant kinship. He was a man of the sea, and this place, these spectral remnants, were born of it too. The figure gestured again, towards the end of the pier, towards the open, foggy sound, as if inviting him to share their endless, silent watch. And Elias, for reasons he couldn't articulate, felt an undeniable urge to stay, to understand the story of the whistle, the lanterns, and the forgotten souls of Haven's Rest. Sarah had inherited the narrow Victorian townhouse from a great-aunt she'd never met, a distant, eccentric relative spoken of in hushed tones by her family. Moving in alone was meant to be a fresh start, a quiet space to pursue her writing. The house was filled with antique furniture shrouded in dust sheets and an air of long uninterrupted stillness. At the end of the dim, upstairs hallway, however, was an anomaly, a plain wooden door, seemingly leading to an attic, but with no visible handle, no keyhole, just a smooth, painted surface that looked as if it hadn't been disturbed in a century. It was firmly shut, its edges sealed with layers of old paint. The first night, exhausted from unpacking, Sarah fell into a deep sleep. But around 3 a.m., she was jolted awake by a sound, a soft, dragging, rhythmic scrape, coming from the direction of the attic door. It was as if something heavy, like a wooden chest or a piece of furniture, was being laboriously pulled across floorboards. She lay frozen, heart hammering, straining her ears in the darkness. After a few minutes, the sound stopped. Dismissing it as the old house settling or her overactive imagination, she eventually drifted back to sleep. The next morning, as she passed the attic door on her way downstairs, she paused. Had the gap between the door and the frame always been that distinct? It seemed a fraction wider, a sliver of impenetrable blackness now visible where before there had been only sealed paint. She ran her fingers along the edge. The old paint was indeed cracked, minutely, as if the door had been subtly prized. The dragging sounds came again the following night, a little louder, a little more insistent. And in the morning, the gap was undeniably wider, perhaps by a millimeter or two. A faint, musty odor, like dried leaves and old fabric, now emanated from the opening. Sarah tried to push the door, to pull it, but it remained stubbornly immobile, yet somehow, not quite sealed. This pattern continued. Every night, the dragging, scraping, sometimes a soft thumping, from behind the sealed door. Every morning, the door a fraction more ajar, the sliver of darkness growing, the musty scent intensifying, sometimes laced with a faint, cloying sweetness like decayed potpourri. Sarah's unease grew into a gnawing dread. She considered calling a locksmith, a carpenter, but a strange reluctance held her back. It felt like an intrusion, a violation of some unspoken rule of the house. She started barricading the door at night, stacking old books, a heavy suitcase, anything she could find against it. But each morning, her makeshift barricade would be neatly moved aside, placed carefully a few feet away, and the door would be opened just that tiny bit more. Whatever was behind the door was patient, persistent, and seemingly capable of moving objects on her side. Her sleep became fragmented, haunted by the nightly sounds and the oppressive sense of anticipation. She began to feel watched, even during the day. The silence of the old house no longer felt peaceful, but charged, expectant. She found herself drawn to the door, staring at the widening crack, a strange compulsion warring with her fear. What was in there? What wanted out? Or perhaps, what wanted her in? One morning, the gap was wide enough for her to peer through if she pressed her eye right against it. She hesitated, then, holding her breath, she did. For a moment, all she saw was blackness. Then, as her eye adjusted, she could make out shapes, vast, towering forms draped in white sheets, like an endless storeroom of forgotten furniture, stretching far beyond what the house's dimensions should allow. And in the oppressive stillness, she thought she saw a flicker of movement deep within, a subtle shifting of one of the white sheets. The musty, sweet scent was stronger now, almost cloying. That night, the sounds were different. Not dragging, but a soft, rhythmic creaking, like an old rocking chair in motion. And beneath it, a faint, almost inaudible humming, a tuneless, childlike melody. Sarah knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. The slow, inexorable opening of the door felt like a countdown. Armed with a heavy flashlight, her heart pounding like a trapped bird, she waited for the morning. When she approached the door, it was open by almost a foot. The humming was clearer, and the scent was overwhelming. She pushed the door. It swung inward with a surprising, silent ease, revealing the vast, dust-filled attic she had glimpsed. It was indeed far larger than the house itself, a cavernous space receding into shadowy depths, packed with sheet-draped monoliths. In the center, illuminated by a weak shaft of light from a grimy, high window she hadn't known existed, an antique wooden rocking chair swayed gently back and forth, though there was no draft. Lying on the seat of the rocker was a small, porcelain doll with vacant, staring eyes and a cracked, painted smile. As Sarah watched, frozen, the doll's head slowly turned, its glassy eyes fixing directly on her. The faint humming intensified, seeming to emanate from the doll itself. The door behind her, she realized with a sickening lurch, had swung silently shut, plunging the hallway outside into near darkness. She was inside. And the dragging sound she'd heard every night, she now understood with dawning horror, hadn't been something being moved away from the door. It had been the sound of the rocking chair, inch by painstaking inch, being dragged closer to it, waiting patiently for her to finally step across the threshold. The attic wasn't just a storage space, it was a room, and it had been expecting her. Arthur Finch, a weary sales rep on a cross-country drive, checked into the Grand Motel in the sleepy town of Oakhaven well past midnight. The night clerk, a young man whose eyelids drooped with exhaustion, fumbled with the ancient register, then handed Arthur a tarnished brass key attached to a worn wooden fob. "Room 210, sir. End of the hall, second floor." Arthur, too tired to register the clerk's slightly confused frown as he said the room number, just nodded and trudged up the creaking staircase. The second-floor hallway was dimly lit by flickering sconces, the floral wallpaper peeling in damp patches. Room 210 was indeed at the very end, its door a darker shade of paint than the others, as if it had been replaced or repainted separately. The room itself was surprisingly spacious, if old-fashioned, heavy velvet curtains, a massive four-poster bed, and an ornate, dark wood writing desk. Arthur barely glanced around before collapsing onto the bed. He woke a few hours later, disoriented. A strange, ambient hum filled the room. He went to the window, pulling back the heavy curtains. Instead of the expected view of Oakhaven's quiet main street and the gas station across the road, he found himself staring out at a vast, sprawling metropolis. Towering skyscrapers, glittering with millions of lights, stretched as far as the eye could see, a river of headlights flowing through concrete canyons below. It was a cityscape he didn't recognize, vibrant and alive, starkly contrasting with the dead-of-night silence he knew Oakhaven should possess. Confused and thinking he was still dreaming, he stumbled back to bed. The next morning, determined to get an early start, Arthur packed his bag. He glanced out the window again. Oakhaven's main street was back, quiet and unassuming under the gray dawn light. He shook his head, attributing the nighttime vision to exhaustion and the unfamiliar room. Downstairs, a different clerk was on duty, a brisk, middle-aged woman. As Arthur handed her the key, she frowned. "Room 210. Sir, there must be some mistake. We don't have a room 210. That wing was demolished after the fire in '78. The second floor only goes up to 208 now." Arthur stared at her, then at the key in her hand, clearly labeled 210. "But I slept there. The young man last night gave me this key." The clerk looked genuinely perplexed, then concerned. "There was no young man on duty last night, sir. It was my shift. And I certainly didn't check you into a non-existent room." A chill snaked down Arthur's spine. He insisted, describing the room, the hallway. The clerk, perhaps to humor him or to investigate a possible squatter, accompanied him upstairs. They walked down the second-floor hallway. It ended abruptly at room 208. Beyond it was a solid brick wall, showing clear signs of having been sectioned off decades ago. There was no room 210. There was no door, no continuation of the corridor. Arthur felt a wave of vertigo. He still had the faint smell of the room's musty velvet in his nostrils, the image of the impossible cityscape seared into his mind. He mumbled an apology, paid for a room he apparently hadn't occupied, and fled Oakhaven as quickly as possible. That night, in a different hotel hundreds of miles away, Arthur couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., he found himself drawn to the window. He pulled back the curtains and froze. Outside, instead of the expected parking lot, was the same sprawling, glittering metropolis he had seen from room 210. His heart hammered. He rushed to the door, flung it open. The hallway outside was not the brightly lit, carpeted corridor of the new hotel, but the dim, peeling wallpaper hallway of the Grand Motel in Oakhaven, stretching impossibly into the distance, the faint flicker of the sconces beckoning him towards a dark wooden door at its very end. He slammed his hotel room door shut, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was trapped. Room 210, it seemed, wasn't just a physical space in Oakhaven, it was a state, a recurring anomaly that had somehow latched onto him. Over the following weeks, the phenomenon intensified. Any hotel room he stayed in, any apartment he visited, would eventually transform. The view from the window would shift to the impossible city. The hallway outside his door would morph into the Grand Motel's haunted corridor. He found an old, leather-bound guest ledger hidden in his suitcase, a ledger he'd never seen before, its pages filled with entries from disparate individuals across decades, all describing their confinement to room 210, their confusion, their eventual resignation. Some entries detailed attempts to map the ever-shifting cityscape, others spoke of encountering other guests in the endless, looping corridors. Arthur Finch was no longer a sales rep, he was a permanent resident of room 210, a phantom room that followed him, superimposed itself onto his reality. He began to add his own entries to the ledger, his pen scratching in the quiet of whatever room he currently occupied, as the impossible city pulsed outside his window and the long, dim hallway of the Grand Motel waited patiently beyond his door. He was another traveler who had checked in, but would never, ever, check out. Clara, a history graduate student with a penchant for primary sources, relished her volunteer days at the small, underfunded Oakhaven Historical Museum. Her current task was sorting through a newly donated box labeled Miscellaneous Correspondence. 19th century, a chaotic jumble of brittle envelopes and faded script. It was amidst this dusty treasure trove that she found it, a cream-colored envelope, thicker than the others, its ink a surprisingly vivid black. What made her breath catch was the addressee, penned in an elegant, spidery copperplate, Miss Clara Holloway, Oakhaven. Her full name. Her current town. Her heart hammered. This had to be a prank, a bizarre coincidence. Trembling, she carefully slit the envelope. The letter within, dated October 17, 1888, was written on heavy, watermarked paper. It began, "My dearest Clara," and went on to speak of profound loneliness, of a shared secret that weighed heavily on the writer's soul, and a desperate hope that Clara would understand and perhaps, one day, offer solace. It was signed simply, A. Shaken, Clara showed the letter to Mrs. Gable, the elderly curator. The curator, after a cursory glance, dismissed it as a fascinating but ultimately unexplainable anomaly, perhaps a misfiled modern letter or a cleverly crafted piece of historical fiction. "Don't let it distract you from the real sorting, dear," she'd said, patting Clara's arm. But Clara couldn't dismiss it. The specificity of her name, the unsettling intimacy of the tone, burrowed under her skin. The next day she volunteered, she approached the box with a mixture of dread and anticipation. Tucked amongst the other letters, almost as if it had materialized overnight, was another cream-colored envelope, identical to the first, addressed to her. This letter, dated October 18, 1888, was more urgent. A. wrote of increasing isolation, of whispers and strange occurrences in their large, empty house, and a growing fear. It also mentioned, chillingly, a detail from a conversation Clara had had with her roommate just the previous evening. A cold dread settled over Clara. This was no prank. Each subsequent visit to the museum yielded a new letter from A. The dates progressed sequentially through October 1888. The tone grew increasingly desperate, the details more unnervingly personal. A. wrote of Clara's specific anxieties about her thesis, her strained relationship with her advisor, even her habit of drinking chamomile tea before bed. The letters were no longer just pleas for understanding, they felt like an invasion, a spectral surveillance from over a century ago. Clara's research into 19th-century Oakhaven yielded nothing about a prominent figure known only as A, who might have owned a large house and suffered such anxieties. Her own academic work stalled, her waking thoughts consumed by the unfolding epistolary drama. She began to dream in sepia tones, of gaslit streets and Victorian parlors, a persistent sense of being watched by unseen eyes. The letters started to include specific instructions, or rather, desperate requests. "You must find the locket, Clara," one implored. "It holds the key to my peace, and perhaps, to yours." Another spoke of a hidden journal, behind the loose stone in the library fireplace. There was no library fireplace in the modern Oakhaven Museum, nor any record of such a feature in its original blueprints. One afternoon, while sifting through another box of unsorted museum artifacts, this one containing dusty personal effects, Clara's fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. It was a tarnished silver locket, intricately engraved with the initial A. Her blood ran cold. It was exactly as described in one of the letters. Inside, instead of a portrait, was a tiny, tightly folded piece of paper. Unfolding it, she read a single, chilling sentence: "I know you feel me watching." The final letter she found was different. The paper was thinner, almost translucent, the ink faint and hurried, dated October 31st, 1888. It was a terrified, fragmented account of a presence in A's house, a darkness that was consuming them. It ended mid-sentence: "It knows you are reading this, Clara. It knows you now too. You must finish what I could not." Clara never returned to the Oakhaven Historical Museum. She abandoned her thesis, her apartment, her life in Oakhaven. But the letters, or the need for them, followed. Occasionally, an old-fashioned cream envelope, addressed in that elegant, spidery script, would appear on her doorstep, in her mailbox, sometimes even amongst her mundane bills. They no longer came from A. They were fragmented, desperate pleas from other voices, other eras, all trapped, all seeking her help to resolve their unfinished business, their spectral anxieties reaching across time to find a new, unwilling archivist. Clara Holloway, the history student, had become a reluctant medium, her life now an endless task of sorting through the desperate correspondence of the lost, each letter a fresh entanglement in a tapestry of historical sorrow. Jenna, a travel blogger known for her Into the Wild solo adventures, had chosen the isolated Blackwood Creek cabin for her latest challenge, a 2-week, off-grid winter retreat. She'd document her experience, the silence, the solitude, the stark beauty of the snow-covered Rockies. The first few days were idyllic. Then the blizzard hit, a monstrous whiteout that raged for 3 days, burying the cabin under feet of snow and severing the satellite phone connection, her only link to the outside world. When the storm finally broke, leaving behind a world of pristine, sculpted white, Jenna felt a thrill of true isolation. But that thrill soon curdled into unease. On the 4th morning, she glanced out the kitchen window while making coffee and saw them, a single set of fresh footprints in the otherwise untouched snow. They emerged from the dense, snow-laden pine forest at the edge of the clearing, clear indentations of heavy boots, leading directly towards the cabin. But then, about 10 feet from her porch, they simply stopped. Vanished. As if the walker had been plucked into the air or dissolved into the snow itself. Jenna's heart pounded. She grabbed her heavy coat and snowshoes, venturing out. The prints were undeniably real, deep and distinct. But there was no sign of anyone, no other tracks leading away, no disturbance in the snow where they ended. The forest beyond was silent, impenetrable. She circled the cabin. Nothing. Just her own fresh tracks and that one, unsettling line of prints that led to nowhere. She tried to rationalize it, a trick of the wind, melting snow creating an illusion. But the next morning, they were there again. A new set, slightly closer to the cabin this time, again vanishing without a trace before reaching the door. And the morning after that, closer still. Sleep became difficult. Every creak of the old cabin, every rustle of wind in the pines, sounded like an approaching footstep. She started barricading the door at night with the heavy pine table, a futile gesture against something that left no entry tracks. The silence of the mountains, once a comfort, now felt pregnant, watchful. She began to document the footprints obsessively in her blog's offline drafts, her writing shifting from intrepid adventure to unnerved captive. She photographed them, sketched their pattern. The boot print was large, a rugged tread, but somehow lacking the distinct character of a specific brand. It was an archetypal print, almost symbolic. Then, small tokens began to appear where the footprints ended, a perfectly formed pine cone, untouched by the frost, a single, iridescent raven feather, a small stack of carefully balanced, smooth river stones. Offerings? Warnings? Jenna didn't know, but each discovery ratcheted up her fear. One afternoon, driven by a desperate need for answers, she followed the line of footprints not towards the cabin, but back towards the forest where they originated. They led her deeper than she'd ever intended to go, the trees pressing in, the light dimming. The prints remained consistent, unhurried. Just as she was about to turn back, unnerved by the growing darkness and the oppressive silence, she saw it, a crude shelter, almost a lean-to, built against a rock face, woven from fallen branches and pine boughs, nearly invisible against the snowy landscape. There was no smoke from a fire, no sign of recent activity. But at the entrance, the snow was packed down, and a single, identical boot print was pressed into it, as if someone had just stepped out. Jenna didn't dare approach closer. She backed away slowly, her heart a frantic drum, and fled back to the relative safety of her cabin. That night, the sounds outside were different. Not just the wind, but a soft, rhythmic crunching in the snow, circling the cabin. Closer, then further away. The footprints in the morning were now a complete ring around the cabin, like a silent, patient siege. And on her doorstep, placed neatly on the welcome mat, was a small, intricately carved wooden bird, its craftsmanship astonishing, its unpainted eyes seeming to watch her. Jenna felt a profound shift within herself. The fear was still there, but it was overlaid with a strange sense of resignation, almost a curiosity. This wasn't a human threat, not in the conventional sense. This was something older, something intrinsically part of the mountain, the snow, the deep wilderness. She stopped barricading the door. She left a small offering of her own, a packaged protein bar, on the porch. The next morning, the bar was gone. In its place, a handful of dried berries she didn't recognize. The footprints no longer vanished before reaching the door. One morning, a single set led right up to her porch steps, paused, and then retreated back into the forest. The following day, the snow around the cabin was undisturbed. The presence, whatever it was, had withdrawn. Or perhaps, it had decided she was no longer an intruder, but a temporary, respectful guest. When the thaw finally came weeks later and a ranger on a snowmobile reached the isolated cabin, he found Jenna alive, albeit thinner and quieter. Her blog posts, when she finally uploaded them, told a strange, fragmented story, not of a terrifying ordeal, but of an unsettling, almost sacred encounter with an unseen guardian of the snows. She never fully explained the footprints or the tokens, leaving them as an eerie mystery. But she never returned to Blackwood Creek, and for the rest of her life, whenever snow fell, she would find herself looking out the window, half expecting to see a lone set of footprints appearing from the tree line, a silent reminder of her time snowbound with the mountain's quiet, watchful spirit. Eleanor, a novelist grappling with writer's block, sought inspiration in the neglected grandeur of the Blackwood Arms, an apartment building whose faded elegance hinted at a more opulent past. Her attic apartment, vacant for years according to the terse landlord, was dominated by its wallpaper, an intricate, sprawling pattern of faded damask, depicting Baroque swirls, stylized flora, and something else, something indistinct that lurked within the repetitions. The first few days were productive. The quiet, the sense of history, seemed to unlock her creativity. But soon, the wallpaper began to assert itself. During long hours staring at the wall, seeking the right word, Eleanor would notice subtle inconsistencies. A tendril of a floral design would seem to curve a different way than she remembered. A particular shadow within a swirl would appear deeper, more defined. She dismissed it as eye strain, the play of light in the dim, north-facing room. Then, the nighttime shifts began. Lying in bed, in the sliver of moonlight that cut through the grimy window, the patterns on the wall opposite her bed seemed to coalesce. The Baroque swirls would subtly elongate, the floral motifs would merge and soften, until vague, human-like outlines began to emerge from the faded gold and dusty rose. They were indistinct, like figures seen through thick fog, but undeniably humanoid, their forms suggested by the negative space and the flow of the design. And they were always facing her bed. Sleep became a battle. She'd jolt awake, convinced something had moved, that the figures had solidified. But a flick of the bedside lamp would reveal only the ornate, static wallpaper, its patterns innocently flat. Yet, the feeling of being observed lingered, a silent, collective gaze emanating from the walls. Her writing suffered. Instead of her planned historical romance, she found herself describing the wallpaper, its oppressive beauty, the unsettling sense of latent life within its designs. She researched the history of the Blackwood Arms, finding oblique references to previous tenants of the attic apartment who had suffered nervous afflictions, or left abruptly. One old newspaper snippet mentioned a reclusive artist who had lived there in the early 20th century, obsessed with capturing the unseen presences of the building. The figures in the wallpaper grew more defined each night. She could almost discern features, the hint of a downturned mouth, a shadowed eye socket, the suggestion of flowing garments. Their stillness was the most unnerving part, they never moved, yet their silent, collective vigil felt intensely active, a patient, watchful congregation. Eleanor tried covering the wall with a sheet, but in the morning, the sheet would be crumpled on the floor, the wallpaper exposed, its patterns seemingly more vibrant, the figures slightly more prominent, as if in defiance. She considered repainting, but a strange lethargy, a sense of futility, overcame her whenever she contemplated it. It felt as if the wallpaper wanted to be seen. One evening, as dusk settled, she noticed a new detail. Within one of the more defined human outlines, a faint, darker shape appeared, the suggestion of a hand, palm open, extended slightly towards her bed. It was a subtle shift, but it sent a fresh wave of cold dread through her. Her protagonist, in the manuscript that was now almost entirely about the apartment, began to interact with the figures in her own fictional wallpaper, finding solace, then terror, in their silent company. Eleanor felt her own sanity fraying, the boundary between her reality and her fiction blurring. Were the figures her creation, a projection of her stressed mind? Or was she merely documenting a pre-existing, spectral audience? The night the hand seemed to extend further, its shadowy fingers almost distinct, Eleanor didn't sleep. She sat propped up in bed, staring back at the wall, a strange calm settling over her fear. The figures were clearer than ever, a silent assembly of faded aristocrats, melancholic artists, forgotten inhabitants, all rendered in the intricate weave of the damask. They were the previous tenants, she realized, their essences absorbed into the very fabric of the room, their stories imprinted on the walls. As dawn approached, painting the room in pale, gray light, the figures began to recede, melting back into the Baroque swirls and floral motifs. But they left something behind. Etched faintly into the plaster beneath the wallpaper, now visible due to a subtle peeling she hadn't noticed before, were names, dates, fragments of sentences, a hidden layer of history beneath the decorative surface. Eleanor knew she couldn't stay. But as she packed her bags, she took one last look at the wallpaper. It seemed to pulse faintly, a collective sigh of faded gold and dusty rose. She left her unfinished manuscript on the desk, a story of a woman consumed by the patterns on her wall. Perhaps, she thought, it would become another layer, another story for the silent figures to absorb, another presence to join their eternal, watchful congregation in the attic apartment of the Blackwood Arms. And as she closed the door behind her, she couldn't shake the feeling that a new, vague outline was already beginning to form in the damask. Facing the now empty bed, Mark was a creature of habit. Every weekday, he caught the 11:42 p.m. express train from Central Station, the last one heading towards the suburban sprawl where he lived. It was usually sparsely populated at that hour, a mix of late-shift workers and weary revelers. He knew every stop, every rumble of the tracks, every flicker of the lights in the aging carriages. About 6 months into this routine, he first noticed it, Ashworth. That was the name on the faded, soot-stained sign of a station the train sped through without slowing. It was a small, derelict platform, dimly lit by a few sputtering gas-style lamps, with a boarded-up station house half hidden by overgrown ivy. The architecture was clearly Victorian, out of place with the more modern, utilitarian stations further down the line. The odd thing was, Ashworth wasn't on any transit map, digital or printed. He'd checked. It simply didn't exist, according to official records. Whenever the train hurtled past Ashworth, Mark would look out, fascinated. The platform was always deserted, yet it didn't feel entirely abandoned. There was a strange, expectant stillness about it, as if it were waiting. He'd try to point it out to other passengers, but they'd either be asleep, engrossed in their phones, or would just glance distractedly and shrug, not registering its incongruity. It was as if only he could truly see it. One Tuesday night, the train was emptier than usual. Mark sat by the window, watching the familiar city lights give way to darker suburbs. As they approached the stretch where Ashworth should be, he tensed. The train, instead of maintaining its express speed, began to slow. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels decelerated, the brakes hissing. With a gentle lurch, the train glided to a halt alongside the dimly lit, forgotten platform of Ashworth Station. Mark stared. This had never happened before. The automated announcer remained silent. No other passengers stirred. The doors of his carriage, directly opposite the boarded-up station house, slid open with a pneumatic sigh, revealing the misty, gas-lamplit platform. An unnerving silence pressed in, broken only by the faint hum of the train's idling engine. He looked around the carriage. A woman a few rows down was asleep, her head lolling. A man further back was staring blankly at his phone, oblivious. No one else seemed to notice they had stopped at an unscheduled, unlisted station. The open doors were an invitation, silent and specific, just for him. A cold dread mixed with an irresistible curiosity. He could smell damp earth and coal smoke drifting in from the platform, scents that didn't belong in his modern, electrified world. The silence from the station was profound, as if it existed in a pocket outside of normal time. He hesitated. This was wrong, deeply wrong. But the mystery of Ashworth, the station only he seemed to truly perceive, pulled at him with an almost physical force. He rose slowly from his seat. As he stepped towards the open doors, he glanced back. The other passengers remained in their own worlds, unaware. His foot touched the grimy concrete of Ashworth platform. The air was colder here, heavier. The gas lamps cast flickering, elongated shadows. He could see details now, tarnished brass fittings on the boarded-up door of the station house, intricate ironwork on the lampposts, cracks in the platform paving filled with stubborn weeds. It was perfectly preserved, a snapshot of a bygone era. As soon as both his feet were firmly on the platform, the doors of the train slid shut behind him with a decisive hiss. The train didn't immediately pull away. It sat there, humming, as if waiting to see what he would do. He was alone on the platform of Ashworth. The silence was absolute. He looked towards the boarded-up station house. From behind one of the grimy, boarded windows, he thought he saw a faint flicker of light, like a candle being lit. Then, a barely perceptible sound reached him, the faint, melancholic strains of an old waltz, played on a tinny, distant piano. A new emotion began to surface. Overriding the fear, a strange sense of homecoming, of recognition. It was as if some forgotten part of him knew this place. The train finally began to move, slowly at first, then gathering speed, its red taillights receding into the misty darkness, leaving him standing on the platform of the station that didn't exist. He turned towards the station house. The music was a little louder now, beckoning. He noticed a small, almost hidden pathway leading around the side of the building, towards where the faint candlelight seemed to glow. Mark knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he wouldn't be catching the 11:42 p.m. train home anymore. Ashworth had been waiting for him, and now, it had him. He took a step down the path, towards the music and the light, a new, permanent resident of the train station that didn't stop for anyone else. David, an experienced camper seeking solace from a stressful city job, had hiked deep into the supposed wilderness of Blackwood National Forest. His chosen spot was a small clearing by a rushing stream, miles from any marked trail or sign of civilization. The first night was idyllic, filled with the sounds of crickets and the gentle murmur of the water. It was on the second night, just as the moon reached its zenith, that he heard it. A single, clear bell tolled, faint but unmistakable, echoing through the dense trees. Dong! It was a deep, resonant sound, like that of an old church bell. David sat bolt upright in his sleeping bag, heart pounding. He knew this forest. There were no churches, no settlements, not even an old ranger station for at least a 50-mile radius. The sound was too clear, too deliberate to be a trick of the wind or an animal. After a long, tense silence, there were no further tolls. He eventually dismissed it as an auditory hallucination, a product of isolation and an overactive imagination. But the next night, at precisely midnight, it came again. Dong! This time, it was subtly, yet undeniably, closer. The resonance was deeper, the echo shorter. The hair on David's arms stood on end. This was no hallucination. Each subsequent night, the pattern repeated. At the stroke of midnight, the single, mournful bell would toll. And each night, its origin felt incrementally nearer. What had been a faint whisper on the edge of hearing was now a distinct, sonorous peal that seemed to vibrate in his very chest. His carefully planned week-long retreat became a nightly vigil of mounting dread. He tried to pinpoint the direction. It seemed to come from deeper within the woods, from the north, where the forest grew thickest and the terrain became more rugged. During the day, he'd make cautious forays in that direction, finding nothing but dense undergrowth, ancient trees, and an unnerving silence. There were no paths, no signs of human passage, nothing that could explain a bell of that size and clarity. His rational mind struggled. Was it some eccentric hermit with a bell? A forgotten piece of logging equipment somehow still functional? But the profound sense of isolation he'd initially sought now felt like a terrifying vulnerability. The bell had a solemn, almost funereal quality that chilled him to the bone. On the fifth night, the bell toll was so close it seemed to come from just beyond his campsite, perhaps only a few hundred yards into the trees. Dong! The sound was immense, powerful, shaking the very ground beneath him. He could almost feel the air displace. He grabbed his most powerful flashlight, his camp axe clutched in a white-knuckled grip, and plunged into the darkness, determined to confront the source. He pushed through the tangled branches, the flashlight beam dancing erratically. The forest was eerily silent, the usual nocturnal rustlings absent. He called out, his voice hoarse, "Hello? Who's there?" Only the drip of moisture from the leaves answered him. After what felt like an eternity of stumbling through the undergrowth, he broke through into a small, unnaturally clear, circular glade. The air here was cold, still, and heavy. In the center of the glade, illuminated by the weak moonlight filtering through the canopy, stood a single, massive, weathered stone plinth. And atop it, suspended from a crude, ancient-looking wooden frame, was a bell. It was huge, easily 5 feet across, made of dark, tarnished bronze, covered in strange, indecipherable carvings. It looked impossibly old, as if it had stood there for centuries, forgotten by time. There was no rope, no visible mechanism for ringing it. Yet, as he stared, he could feel a faint vibration emanating from it, a hum of latent power. Suddenly, a new sound broke the silence, a soft, rhythmic chanting, coming from the shadows at the edge of the glade. He swung his flashlight around. Figures were emerging from the trees, cloaked and hooded, their faces obscured by deep shadow. They moved slowly, deliberately, forming a circle around the glade, around him, around the bell. There were dozens of them. David was paralyzed by terror. These were no ordinary campers. The chanting grew louder, a guttural, hypnotic drone in a language he didn't recognize. One of the figures, taller than the rest, stepped forward, raising a hand. The chanting stopped. The tall figure pointed a skeletal finger towards the bell, then towards David. A single, raspy word cut through the silence, a word that seemed to resonate with the same ancient power as the bell itself: time. He understood then. This wasn't just a bell, it was a marker, a summons. And he hadn't found it, it, and its keepers, had been drawing him in, night by night. He was not an accidental witness, he was an offering, or perhaps, a new ringer, chosen to perpetuate some ancient, unknown ritual. As if an unseen hand had struck it, the great bronze bell beside him began to toll, dong. Dong. Dong, each peal more powerful than the last, the sound no longer just heard but felt, a crushing wave of sonic force that vibrated through his bones, his skull, his very soul, as the cloaked figures began to close in, their shadowed forms merging with the oppressive darkness of the forest. The bell in the woods had found its purpose for the night. After her estranged Aunt Elspeth passed, Maya was tasked with clearing out the old woman's cluttered Victorian study. Elspeth had been a recluse, a collector of oddities, and her study was a testament to a life lived amongst dusty books and forgotten trinkets. In a massive, dark oak writing desk, Maya found a single drawer that was firmly locked. It was an ornate little thing, with no visible keyhole, just a small, tarnished brass knob. Despite her best efforts, it wouldn't budge. She made a mental note to call a locksmith and continued sorting. That night, sleeping in Elspeth's guest room, Maya was woken by a faint sound from downstairs, a soft, persistent rattling, like someone gently shaking a drawer. It seemed to be coming from the study. Heart pounding, she crept down. The house was silent. She checked the desk, the drawer was still firmly shut. Chalking it up to the old house settling, she went back to bed. The rattling came again the next night, more distinct, more insistent. And the night after that. It always started around 2 a.m. and lasted for an hour or so. Maya tried everything, wedging paper into the drawer, even taping it shut, but the rattling would continue, and in the morning, her efforts would be undone, the tape neatly peeled off, the paper gone. On the fourth night, the rattling was particularly vigorous. Maya lay in bed, a knot of dread in her stomach, listening to the tiny, frantic movements from the study below. Then, with a soft, decisive click, the rattling stopped. A profound silence descended on the house. The next morning, with trepidation, Maya entered the study. The little drawer in the oak desk was no longer locked. It was slightly ajar, open by a mere fraction of an inch. Heart in her mouth, she pulled it open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, withered white rose, its petals like brittle paper. It was beautiful, in a melancholic way. Confused, but relieved it wasn't something more sinister, Maya gently closed the drawer. Later that day, she remembered she needed to photograph the desk for the estate valuers. She opened the drawer again to show its interior. The rose was gone. In its place lay a small, antique silver locket. Tarnished with age, lying open to reveal two miniature, faded portraits of children she didn't recognize. Maya stared, bewildered. She was certain she had seen a rose. Had she imagined it? She closed the drawer, a strange unease settling over her. A few hours later, driven by a nagging curiosity, she opened it again. The locket was gone. Now, the velvet lining held a collection of smooth, gray river stones, arranged in a spiral pattern. This became the new, unsettling pattern. Every time Maya opened the drawer, its contents had changed. Sometimes it held a child's lost marble, sometimes a handful of foreign coins, once a delicate, pressed butterfly with vibrant blue wings. Another time, it was a single, yellowed playing card, the Queen of Spades. There was no logic to the objects, no discernible connection. They were always small, always antique or imbued with a sense of age and forgotten ownership. The drawer never rattled anymore. It simply waited, offering up its latest enigma whenever she dared to look. Maya felt like she was part of some bizarre, silent exchange, a game with rules she didn't understand, orchestrated by the deceased Aunt Elspeth or perhaps by the desk itself. She stopped trying to make sense of it. The objects were transient, appearing and disappearing like fleeting memories. She began to photograph each new item, compiling a strange, visual diary of the drawer's ephemeral treasures. The locksmith was never called. One morning, she opened the drawer to find a small, leather-bound diary. Its pages were filled with elegant, spidery script, Aunt Elspeth's handwriting. It wasn't a diary of daily events, but a catalogue, much like Maya's own photographic record. Elspeth had been observing the drawer's changing contents for years, theorizing it was a conduit, a borrowing place, between worlds or times, where lost and forgotten things momentarily surfaced before moving on. Elspeth hadn't been frightened, she'd been fascinated, seeing it as a source of endless, gentle wonder. The last entry in Elspeth's diary read, "Perhaps today it will show me something truly new. Or perhaps, something meant just for me to return." Maya closed the diary, a new understanding dawning. The drawer wasn't a threat, it was a mystery, a quiet marvel. She opened it again. The diary was gone. In its place, nestled on the velvet, was a single, intricately carved wooden key, clearly old, but polished as if by frequent handling. It didn't look like it belonged to any lock in the house. She picked it up. It felt warm in her hand. As she held it, the drawer gave a soft, final click and smoothly closed itself. When she tried the knob, it was locked, just as it had been when she first found it. The key in her hand didn't fit. Maya never saw the contents of the drawer change again. But she kept the mysterious key, wondering what forgotten lock it was meant to open, what new story it might unlock. And sometimes, in the quiet of the old study, she thought she could hear the faintest, almost inaudible rattle, not from the desk, but from somewhere else in the house, as if another lost thing was patiently waiting to be found, or another drawer was preparing to offer up its secrets. Leo, a perpetually struggling actor whose dreams of stardom were rapidly fading into the harsh glare of unpaid bills, couldn't believe his luck. He'd landed a temporary gig as an assistant stage manager at the Grand Regent Theatre, a magnificent, if somewhat decaying, relic from the vaudeville era. The pay was meager, but it came with a surprising perk, a small, dusty apartment tucked away above the cavernous stage, accessible by a narrow, winding staircase backstage. The first few nights were a godsend. The theater, empty and silent after the day's rehearsals for a rather uninspired modern comedy, offered a profound quietude. Leo relished the solitude, the faint scent of old velvet, dust, and forgotten grease paint. Then, on the fourth night, he was jolted awake by voices. Distinct, theatrical voices, resonating from the stage directly below his apartment. He glanced at his clock, 2:30 a.m. The theater should be locked, empty. Cautiously, he crept to the small window in his floor that, with some contortion, offered a sliver of a view of the stage. It was dark, utterly empty. Yet the voices continued, a man and a woman, their delivery crisp, their emotions palpable, anger, despair, a desperate plea. They were performing. He strained to hear the lines. They were archaic, poetic, filled with grand pronouncements and tragic foreshadowing. It wasn't the contemporary play currently in rehearsal. This was something older, something grander, something he didn't recognize. After a few minutes, the voices faded, the scene apparently over. Silence reclaimed the theater. The next night, it happened again. Different voices this time, perhaps 3 or 4, engaged in a witty, rapid-fire exchange, then a poignant soliloquy delivered by a deep baritone. Again, the stage below was dark and verifiably empty. Leo began to keep a notepad by his bed, frantically scribbling down fragments of the dialogue he overheard. The moon weeps for fallen kings. Thy heart, a gilded cage where sorrows sing. Betrayal wears a comely, smiling mask. He asked the theater's veteran custodian, a grizzled old man named Silas, if the theater was haunted. Silas just grunted. This place has seen more drama offstage than on, son. Every theater's got its ghosts. But he offered no specifics about spectral performances. Leo delved into the Regent's archives, a dusty collection of old programs and playbills stored in a forgotten backstage room. He searched for the lines he'd transcribed, for any play that matched the style and anachronistic language. Nothing. It was as if these spectral performances were from a play that had vanished from history, a lost masterpiece. The nightly performances grew more intense, more complete. He could almost follow the plot now, a sprawling tragedy of ambition, love, and royal intrigue, filled with characters whose names felt both alien and strangely familiar. He began to feel less like an eavesdropper and more like a privileged, solitary audience member. The spectral actors were incredible, their performances nuanced and powerful, far surpassing anything he'd seen on modern stages. One night, he heard a new voice, a young man, delivering lines that resonated deeply with Leo's own artistic frustrations. It was a speech about striving for greatness, about the fear of being forgotten. As the spectral actor spoke, Leo felt an overwhelming urge to speak the lines himself. He whispered them along, his voice a faint echo in his small apartment. The next morning, he found a tattered, leather-bound play script lying on the dusty table in his room. It was untitled, the pages brittle and yellowed, filled with elegant, handwritten script. It was the play. The lost play. And the role of the young, ambitious courtier, the one whose lines he'd whispered, was heavily annotated, stage directions penciled in, lines underlined. That night, when the spectral performance reached that character's soliloquy, Leo didn't just whisper. He stood in his small apartment, looking down towards the unseen stage, and spoke the lines aloud, his voice gaining strength, imbued with an emotion he hadn't known he possessed. From the stage below, there was a beat of silence, then the other spectral voices resumed, their lines subtly shifting, as if acknowledging, incorporating his contribution. This became his new routine. He was no longer just an assistant stage manager, he was part of the phantom troupe, an understudy who had found his role. He learned the entire part, living and breathing the lost play. His own acting improved dramatically, he felt a connection to the craft, a depth of understanding that had always eluded him. The contemporary play The Regent was rehearsing opened to mediocre reviews and closed quickly. The theater went dark again. But for Leo, the performances never stopped. He was the only living member of a cast of ghosts, playing to an empty house, night after night, in a masterpiece no one remembered. One morning, Silas found Leo's apartment empty. The dusty rooms were undisturbed, except for the leather-bound, untitled play script resting on the table, open to the young courtier's most famous soliloquy. Leo was gone. But sometimes, late at night, when the Grand Regent Theatre stood silent and dark, passers-by would report hearing faint, theatrical voices drifting from within its walls. And occasionally, a new, vibrant young voice would join the chorus, delivering lines of poetic grandeur with passion and precision, another understudy seamlessly integrated into the spectral cast, forever performing the play that refused to be forgotten, even if only its actors remained to hear the applause of ghosts. The vacation cabin, nestled deep in the Oregon woods, was charmingly rustic, right down to the ancient, rabbit-eared television set in the corner of the living room. Liam, hoping for a week of digital detox and quiet contemplation, hadn't expected much from it. True to form, the TV offered only a blizzard of hissing static on every channel. He'd shrugged, unplugged it, and forgotten about it. A few nights into his stay, a strange, insistent hum woke him. He glanced at his phone, 3:32 a.m. The hum seemed to be coming from the living room. Confused, he patted out. The old TV was on, its screen a roiling sea of gray and white static. He was certain he'd left it unplugged. As he reached for the cord, the clock on his phone ticked over to 3:33 a.m. Instantaneously, the static on the screen resolved. Not into a clear picture, but into a blurry, monochrome image. It was a fixed shot, slightly tilted, of a room. Liam's blood ran cold. The room was identical to the one he was standing in, the same stone fireplace, the same worn armchair angled towards it, the same braided rug, the same moose head, or rather unfortunate piece of taxidermy, mounted above the mantel. It was his cabin, but viewed as if through a grainy, malfunctioning security camera. He stared, heart pounding. The image was completely still. No movement, no sound other than the faint hum of the TV. After precisely 1 minute, as his phone's clock ticked to 3:34 a.m., the image dissolved back into a furious blizzard of static. Then, the TV clicked off, plunging the room back into silence. Liam barely slept. The next night, he was waiting. He'd plugged the TV back in, his gaze fixed on its blank screen. At 3:32 a.m., the hum started. At 3:33 a.m., the static coalesced. The same blurry, monochrome shot of the cabin living room appeared. Still, empty. 1 minute. Then static, then silence. This became a nightly ritual, a source of escalating dread and morbid fascination. He tried to find a hidden camera, searched every inch of the cabin. Nothing. He wondered if it was a prank, a pre-recorded loop. But the image, though blurry, seemed subtly different each time. A log shifted in the fireplace grate, a shadow falling differently. It felt live. On the fourth night, his breath hitched. The room on the screen was the same. But this time, someone was in it. A figure, indistinct and shrouded in shadow, was sitting in the armchair, perfectly still, facing away from the camera, towards the fireplace. Liam's own armchair, just a few feet away from him, was empty. He could feel the hairs on his neck prickle. The figure on screen didn't move for the entire minute. Then static. Silence. He started talking to the screen during the 1-minute window. "Who are you? What do you want?" Only the hum of the TV answered. The next night, the figure was there again, still facing the fireplace. But this time, as if in response to his unheard questions, its head tilted slightly, a slow, deliberate movement, as if listening. Liam felt he was losing his mind. Was he seeing a reflection of himself from another time, another dimension? Was it a ghost, trapped in a loop within the cabin's oldest appliance? The isolation of the woods, once a comfort, now felt oppressive, the silence charged with an unseen presence. He tried to stay away from the living room at 3:33 a.m. He barricaded himself in the bedroom. But the hum of the TV would still reach him, and an irresistible compulsion would draw him out, to witness the nightly transmission. One night, the figure in the chair on screen was different. It was still facing the fireplace, but it seemed clearer. He could almost make out the shape of a head, shoulders. And then, with agonizing slowness, it began to turn. Not its whole body, just its head, swiveling around as if to look directly at the hidden camera, directly at Liam. He couldn't breathe. He could see no features in the blurry darkness, just the impression of a face turning towards him. The 1-minute mark was approaching. Just before the static returned, the figure on screen raised a hand, a shadowy, indistinct gesture, as if in acknowledgement, or perhaps, an invitation. The next morning, Liam packed his bags, his digital detox forgotten, his nerves shredded. He had to get out. As he was about to leave, he took one last look at the old TV. It was off, silent, innocuous. But on its dusty screen, barely visible, was a single, faint handprint, as if someone from the inside had pressed against the glass. He drove away as fast as the winding mountain roads would allow. He never looked back. But for years afterwards, sometimes, when he woke in the dead of night, he would feel an inexplicable urge to turn on the nearest television, half expecting to see a blurry, monochrome room, and a familiar, shadowy figure in an armchair, waiting patiently at 3:33 a.m. on a static channel that only he could find. And sometimes, he swore he could feel the faint hum of an old TV, even when none was nearby. Sarah and Tom were thrilled with their new home, a charming, slightly run-down Victorian fixer-upper on the edge of town. It had character, space, and, as they soon discovered, a rather cluttered attic. While clearing it out, amidst cobweb-draped trunks and forgotten furniture, they found it, an old wooden crib, disassembled, its pieces dusty and stacked neatly in a corner. It was beautifully carved, clearly an antique, though a little melancholic in its disuse. They decided to leave it for now, planning to perhaps restore it one day, or simply dispose of it later. That first night in their new home, exhausted from moving, they fell into a deep sleep. Around 2 a.m., Sarah was woken by a sound, faint but distinct, a soft, ethereal melody, like a lullaby being hummed or played on a distant music box. It seemed to be coming from upstairs, from the direction of the attic. Tom, a heavy sleeper, didn't stir. Sarah listened, her heart quickening. The melody was unfamiliar, sweet yet deeply sorrowful. After a few minutes, it faded away. She told herself it was the old house settling, or perhaps a neighbor's wind chimes carrying on the night air. The next morning, Tom went up to the attic to retrieve a box. He came down a few minutes later, his face pale. "Sarah," he said, his voice strained. "You need to see this." She followed him up the narrow attic stairs. The dusty, jumbled space was as they'd left it, except for one glaring, impossible change. In the center of the room, where before there had been only a clear patch of floorboards, stood the antique wooden crib. It was perfectly assembled, its joints fitted, its carved railings gleaming faintly in the dim light filtering through the grimy attic window. It looked as if it had been standing there for years, waiting. Sarah gasped. "How? Who did this?" Tom shook his head, bewildered. "I have no idea. The attic door was locked from our side. No one could have gotten in. They checked for any signs of entry, any logical explanation. There was none. The crib stood silently, a beautifully crafted enigma. Uneasy, they decided to disassemble it again, carefully stacking the pieces back in the corner. That night, the lullaby returned, a little louder this time, its sorrowful melody weaving through the quiet house. Sarah lay rigid, listening, a cold dread creeping over her. And in the morning, the crib was assembled again, standing proudly in the center of the attic, as if mocking their efforts. This became their new, terrifying reality. Every night, the faint, heartbreaking lullaby would drift down from the attic. Every morning, the disassembled crib would be found perfectly reassembled, an impossible, silent accusation. They tried removing the crib pieces from the attic entirely, storing them in the locked garage. The next morning, the crib was back in its place in the attic, fully assembled, the garage door still bolted from the inside. Sleep became a torment. The lullaby, though gentle, felt increasingly oppressive, filled with an unspoken grief. They started to hear other sounds from the attic, a soft rocking, as if an invisible hand were tending the crib, sometimes a faint, almost inaudible sigh. Desperate, Sarah researched the history of the house. She found old town records, census data, obituaries. A century ago, the house had belonged to a family named Blackwood. They had a young child, a baby girl named Alara, who had died in infancy, cause of death listed as failure to thrive. The dates coincided with the likely age of the antique crib. The next time they found the crib assembled, Sarah noticed something new. Draped carefully over one of its railings was a tiny, hand-knitted baby bonnet, faded yellow, exquisitely made. It hadn't been there before. It felt impossibly soft, yet carried the faint scent of dust and old sorrows. Sarah and Tom realized they weren't dealing with a prank or a simple haunting. This was something deeper, a profound, lingering grief made manifest. The spirit of Alara, or perhaps her heartbroken mother, was trapped in a loop, endlessly tending an empty crib, singing a lullaby to a child who was no longer there. One evening, instead of disassembling the crib, Sarah did something different. She found a small, soft doll she had kept from her own childhood. With trembling hands, she went up to the attic. The lullaby was already playing, a fragile, yearning sound. She gently placed the doll in the center of the antique crib. "For Ilara," she whispered into the dusty air. "May she rest now." The lullaby faltered, then slowly faded into silence. A profound stillness settled over the attic, different from before, not an expectant silence, but a peaceful one. The next morning, Sarah and Tom went up to the attic with trepidation. The crib stood assembled, the doll nestled peacefully within it. Nothing had changed. And the night after, for the first time since they'd moved in, there was no lullaby. The attic remained quiet. The crib stayed in the attic, the doll within it. Sarah and Tom never moved it again. Sometimes, late at night, Sarah thought she could still hear the faintest, almost imperceptible sigh from upstairs, but it no longer sounded sorrowful. It sounded like a whisper of peace, a final, gentle release. The empty crib was no longer empty, and perhaps, in some small way, neither was the heart of the unseen presence that had haunted their new home. Leo had always been drawn to places with history, which was why he'd chosen the slightly dilapidated grandeur of the Oakhaven Apartments, a building that had seen better centuries. His unit, on the third floor, was spacious but filled with quirks, the most notable of which was a long, blank stretch of wall in his living room. According to the building plans he'd casually glanced at, there was no adjoining room, just the thick, solid exterior wall of the building. A few weeks after moving in, he began to notice it, a faint, almost imperceptible glow emanating from a section of that blank wall. It was strongest at night, a soft, diffused luminescence, like a dim light filtering through thick canvas. He'd run his hands over the wallpaper, old, textured flocking, feeling for any heat, any hidden panel. Nothing. He dismissed it as a trick of the light, perhaps a reflection from a distant street lamp catching the old plaster in a strange way. Then came the murmurs. Late at night, when the city outside had quieted to a low hum, he'd hear them, soft, indistinct voices, seemingly coming from inside the glowing section of the wall. It wasn't clear speech, more like a hushed, continuous conversation, the words just beyond the threshold of understanding. He'd press his ear to the cool wallpaper, straining to decipher them, but they remained a sibilant, frustratingly vague chorus. His unease grew. He asked the building superintendent, a taciturn old man named Mr. Henderson, about the wall. Henderson just grunted, saying it was a load-bearing exterior wall, solid as they come, and muttered something about old buildings having their noises. The glow behind the wall intensified subtly each night, and the murmurs grew a fraction louder, taking on a slightly more urgent, almost pleading tone. Leo started to feel a constant, low-level anxiety, a sense of being listened to, observed from the other side of the plaster and brick. He began to avoid that section of the living room, his gaze always skittering away from the faint, persistent light. One morning, he noticed it, a hairline crack, no thicker than a spider's thread, running vertically down the glowing section of the wallpaper. It hadn't been there the day before. He touched it gingerly, the plaster beneath felt strangely cool, almost damp. Throughout the day, the crack seemed to lengthen, infinitesimally, but undeniably. And that night, the murmurs were different. They were no longer just a vague chorus, he could hear individual voices within the collective, their tones varied, some soft and beseeching, others insistent, almost agitated. And beneath it all, a new sound, a faint, rhythmic scraping, like fingernails dragging slowly across rough stone, coming from directly behind the crack. He couldn't sleep. He sat in the dim light of his living room, staring at the wall, at the glowing fissure that was now clearly visible. As he watched, hypnotized by fear, he saw the wallpaper around the crack begin to bulge, just slightly, as if something were pressing against it from the other side. A small flake of old paint detached itself and drifted to the floor. The pressure increased. The bulge grew more pronounced, the wallpaper straining, tiny tearing sounds now audible over the chorus of murmurs and the relentless, soft scraping. Leo wanted to run, to scream, but he was frozen, a spectator to this impossible unfolding. With a soft, sighing tear, the wallpaper split further along the crack. Through the widening gap, he could see not brick or insulation, but a profound, unnatural darkness, a void that seemed to drink the light from his lamp. And from that darkness, something was indeed pushing. He could see the pale, indistinct shape of it, a hand. A tendril. Pressing against the fragile barrier of plaster and ancient wallpaper. The murmurs coalesced into a single, pleading whisper that seemed to resonate directly in his mind, "Let us out, help us, so long." The thing behind the wall pushed again, harder. The crack spiderwebbed, more plaster flaking away. He could now clearly see the pale, elongated fingers of a hand, unnaturally thin, pressing through, seeking purchase. The light from within was not a warm glow, but a cold, ethereal luminescence, outlining the disturbing silhouette. Leo finally broke free from his paralysis. He stumbled backwards, a strangled cry escaping his lips. This wasn't just an old building with quirks, this was a prison, and he was witnessing a jailbreak from another dimension, or perhaps, from a space that had been sealed away for centuries, its inhabitants desperate for release. The hand found the edge of the torn wallpaper and began to pull. More of the wall crumbled. He could see the vague outline of a face in the darkness beyond, eyes that seemed to glow with the same cold light. The chorus of murmurs swelled, a symphony of desperate, ancient voices, finally on the verge of freedom. He knew he had to get out, to warn someone, though who would believe him? As he scrambled for the door, he heard a final, triumphant tear from the wall, followed by a collective, sighing exhalation from the other side. The light behind the wall was no longer faint, it was pouring into his living room, cold and stark, and with it came the first of the murmuring, shadowy figures, stepping slowly, hesitantly, into a world they hadn't seen for an eternity. Leo fled, the sound of their soft, countless footsteps and hushed, grateful whispers pursuing him down the stairs and out into the indifferent city night. Dr. Alastair Finch, a dedicated but somewhat obsessive historical researcher, had finally secured after-hours access to the university library's seldom-used West Wing. This section, rumored to house arcane texts and forgotten archives, had been officially closed for structural reasons for years, but Alastair, with his persistent charm and academic clout, had managed to get a special dispensation. He was searching for primary sources for his monograph on obscure 17th-century alchemical societies. The West Wing was a labyrinth of towering shelves, thick with dust and the scent of decaying paper. Most doors were unlocked, leading to predictably mundane storage rooms or cramped, forgotten offices. But one door, at the very end of a narrow, unlit corridor, stood out. It was heavy oak, bound with tarnished brass, and bore no markings or numbers. Unlike the ambient mustiness of the rest of the wing, the air around this particular door was noticeably colder, a distinct, almost unnatural chill that made the hairs on Alastair's arms stand up. It was firmly locked, the old iron keyhole offering no purchase to his collection of borrowed master keys. Intrigued and slightly unnerved, Alastair made a mental note of it, planning to inquire further. But his research consumed him, and the locked, cold door became a minor, background mystery. Several weeks into his nocturnal explorations, Alastair was working late, lost in a particularly dense Latin manuscript. He had almost forgotten about the anomalous door until he took a break, stretching his cramped limbs and wandering the silent corridors. As he approached the end of the narrow passage, he stopped dead. The heavy oak door, the one that had been resolutely locked, the one that emanated a palpable chill, now stood slightly ajar, a sliver of profound darkness visible in the gap. His heart began to hammer. He hadn't heard it open. There was no one else in the West Wing, the security guard was stationed floors below. Cautiously, he pushed it further. It swung inward with a silent, almost weightless ease, revealing a room unlike any other in the library. It wasn't large. Perhaps 20 feet square, lined from floor to ceiling with identical, dark-bound books. There were no windows, and the only light came from a single, bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long, eerie shadows. The chill was intense in here, a deep, bone-aching cold that felt ancient. But it was the books themselves that seized Alistair's attention. They were all of a uniform size and binding, their spines completely blank. There were no titles, no author names, no call numbers. He pulled one down at random. Its cover was smooth, cool to the touch. He opened it. The pages were filled not with printed text, but with meticulously handwritten entries, almost like a ledger. Each entry began with a date, followed by a name, and then a brief, almost cryptic, summary of an event or a life. He pulled down another, then another. All the same format. Some entries were centuries old, detailing births, deaths, discoveries, betrayals. Others were more recent. Then, his blood truly ran cold. He picked up a volume from a lower shelf, its pages feeling newer, the ink somehow sharper. He flipped towards the end. The dates, they were from the future. May 17, 2028, Dr. Eris Thorne, Breakthrough in Neural Regeneration. November 3, 2035, President Alicia Sharma, Global Peace Accord signed. He stared, his mind reeling. These weren't historical records, they were annals of destiny, a chronicle of what was yet to come. His hands trembled as he scanned more pages. He saw names he recognized, colleagues, public figures, alongside events that hadn't yet transpired. Then, he found it. An entry dated only a few weeks into his own future, Dr. Alistair Finch, discovers the analyst chamber. Subsequent obsession leads to. The entry ended there, abruptly, the line unfinished. A wave of dizziness washed over him. The analyst chamber. Was that what this room was called? And what was this subsequent obsession? He felt a desperate urge to know more, to find the continuation of his own entry, to understand his fate. He began pulling down more books, frantically searching for volumes that covered later dates. The room seemed to press in on him, the chill deepening, the silence absolute except for the rustle of pages. He found a book with even later dates, its pages almost crisp. He scanned for his name, his heart pounding. There, further in, another entry, Dr. Alistair Finch, becomes the new analyst. Tasked with. Again, the sentence trailed off, unfinished, as if waiting for the event to occur before it could be fully recorded. The new analyst. Tasked with what? He looked around the room, at the countless volumes lining the shelves, each one a life, a fate, meticulously recorded. He noticed a small, bare wooden desk in one corner, an inkwell, and a single, pristine, blank-paged book lying open upon it, a quill pen resting beside it. A horrifying, yet strangely compelling, understanding began to dawn. This room wasn't just a repository, it was active. Someone, or something, was writing these entries. And it seemed his discovery of the room had set in motion a chain of events that would lead him to become its scribe. He thought of leaving, of running from this impossible, chilling library within a library. But the pull of the knowledge, the lure of understanding his own unfinished entry, was too strong. He found himself walking towards the desk, towards the open, blank book. The chill in the room seemed to coalesce around him, a silent, expectant pressure. As he reached for the quill, he glanced back at the shelf where he'd found his first future entry. The line, subsequent obsession leads to, was no longer unfinished. New, faint script was appearing, as if written by an invisible hand, his acceptance of the role. The previous analyst, his task complete, finally fades. Alistair looked at his own hand, then at the quill. The silence of the analyst chamber was no longer just the absence of sound, it was the sound of destinies being written, of lives being recorded, of one archivist fading as another prepared to take up the eternal, chilling task. He knew, with a profound and terrifying certainty, that he would not be leaving the West Wing tonight. Or perhaps, ever again. The door had opened for him, and now, his story was to be written within its cold, silent walls. The storm had been brutal, a howling tempest that rattled windows and tore at the aging facade of Daniel's pre-war apartment building. The morning after, the hallways were littered with a fine dusting of plaster, and the air smelled of damp wood and rain. As Daniel headed out for work, navigating around a fallen light fixture in the third-floor corridor, he saw it. A staircase. It was situated at the far end of the hall, where previously there had only been a blank wall leading to a seldom-used fire escape. This staircase was new, undeniably so. It was crafted from a dark, almost black wood he didn't recognize, its grain tight and unfamiliar. The banister was intricately carved with strange, coiling patterns, unlike anything else in the building's utilitarian design. It led upwards, disappearing into the shadows of the floor above, a floor he hadn't known existed beyond the main roof access. Daniel stopped, frowning. He'd lived in the building for 5 years. He knew its layout intimately. This staircase hadn't been there yesterday. He was certain of it. He approached cautiously. The wood felt cool and smooth beneath his tentative touch, yet impossibly solid, as if it had always been a part of the building's structure. He glanced around. Mrs. Henderson from 3B bustled past, giving him an odd look for staring at a blank wall, but she didn't acknowledge the staircase at all. He tried to point it out to Mr. Chen from 3D, who just nodded vaguely and hurried on his way, clearly not seeing anything out of the ordinary. It was as if the staircase existed only for him. Throughout the day, the image of the dark, unfamiliar stairs gnawed at him. Had the storm somehow altered the building? Or was he losing his mind? He researched the building's history online, finding old blueprints. There was no record of a 4th floor in that section, no mention of such an ornate staircase. That evening, returning home, the staircase was still there, a silent, shadowy invitation in the dimly lit hallway. The air around it felt colder, and he could hear a faint, almost inaudible hum, like distant machinery or a low, drawn-out note. He stood before it for a long time, fear warring with an intense, inexplicable curiosity. Where did it lead? And why could only he see it? For several days, he tried to ignore it. He used the main stairwell, deliberately avoiding the end of the hall. But its presence was a constant, nagging weight on his mind. He started to dream about it, climbing endless flights of dark wooden stairs, the coiling patterns on the banister seeming to writhe under his touch. One night, he couldn't resist any longer. The hum from the staircase seemed louder, more insistent. The shadows at the top seemed deeper, more beckoning. Taking a deep breath, he placed his foot on the first step. The wood was cold beneath his shoe, yet strangely yielding, almost soft. He took another step, then another. The hallway behind him, with its familiar flickering lights and peeling paint, seemed to recede, the sounds of the city fading. The only sound was the faint hum and the soft creak of the unfamiliar wood beneath his weight. He was halfway up the first flight when he heard it. A sound from below, from the bottom of the staircase, where he had just been standing. A skittering, scratching noise, followed by a series of rapid, light thuds. Like something running. Running up the stairs behind him. Fast. Panic seized him. He didn't dare look back. He scrambled upwards, his heart hammering against his ribs, the dark wood blurring beneath his frantic feet. The coiling patterns on the banister seemed to pulse in the dim light. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the very structure of the stairs. The running sound was closer now, a frantic, multi-limbed scrabbling, accompanied by a series of wet, guttural clicks. He could feel its presence, a wave of cold, predatory intent at his heels. He risked a fleeting glance over his shoulder. In the shadows below, he saw not one pursuer, but several, dark, lean shapes, low to the ground. Their eyes glinting with a faint, internal luminescence. They were gaining on him. He reached what he thought was a landing, but it was just a turn, the staircase continuing its relentless ascent into even deeper shadow. There was no door, no exit, just more stairs. He was trapped on this impossible structure, a pathway that had appeared from nowhere, leading to an unknown destination, with unknown horrors chasing him from behind. The air grew colder, the hum more intense, almost painful. He could hear the clicking, panting breath of his pursuers just a few steps behind him. He closed his eyes, bracing for the inevitable. Then, as suddenly as it began, the pursuit stopped. The sounds faded. He was alone again on the dark, silent staircase. He cautiously opened his eyes. He was standing on a small, circular platform. Before him was a single, unadorned wooden door, made of the same dark, unfamiliar wood as the stairs. It had no handle, no keyhole. He had reached the top. Or a top. As he stared at the door, it began to glow faintly from within, the hum now a soft, welcoming thrum. He heard a voice, not from behind him, but from the other side of the door, calm and resonant, yet utterly inhuman. "Welcome, Daniel. We have been expecting you. The storm merely accelerated your awareness of the path. Step through. Your true residence awaits." Daniel looked back down the shadowed, empty staircase. There was no sign of his pursuers. There was no way back to his familiar hallway, to his old life. The stairs that didn't exist yesterday had led him here, to this impossible door, to this unsettling invitation. With a sense of profound dread and an even stranger sense of inevitability, he reached out and touched the glowing wood. The door swung silently inward, revealing not a room, but a vast, starlit void, and the beginning of a path made not of wood, but of shimmering, insubstantial light. The hum enveloped him, and he stepped through, leaving the impossible staircase, and the world he knew, forever behind.